Tonight, we step into the low salt marsh offices of an 1870s Nantes salt pan tally clerk, and we follow the strange little tally marks that fit. Settle in and let the work find its slow pace. The morning is damp at the edges, with river air coming in from the Loire, and the wooden shutters hold a pale grey light. You are beside the table before the day has properly begun, where the ledger lies open and the tally sticks wait in a neat bundle. The ink has a faint iron smell, the kind that clings to fingers after a long day of writing. Somewhere outside, a cartwheel moves over wet stone, and the sound arrives softly through the wall. In 1870s Nantes, the salt pan tally clerk sits between marsh and market, between weather and weight, between the white heaps drying near the pans and the careful marks that make them count. We are not in a grand office. We are in a working room, plain and cool, with a chair worn smooth by use and a narrow shelf for receipts. The strange part is not loud at all. It is only a pattern of notches, strokes and small crossings, marks that seem odd until your hand learns them. Then they begin to fit the work like a key in an old lock, each sign shaped by habit, by local measure, and by the need to remember exactly what was gathered. You can imagine the clerk drawing the first line of the morning, steadying the paper with one hand while the other dips the pen. The nib makes a small scratching sound. The page drinks the ink. Outside, the marsh holds its breath under a low sky, and every shallow basin waits for sun, wind, and patient hands. The salt itself has come from quiet labor. Men and women have walked the narrow clay banks between the pans, guiding brine through channels and ponds, letting water thicken under summer light. Even when the day is cold, the memory of heat remains in the place, stored in white crystals and hard ground. We begin with the room, because the room teaches the rhythm. There is a table, a ledger, a sand shaker for drying ink, and a few worn tools that no one thinks much about until they are missing. The tally clerk knows where each thing belongs. You know it too, after only a little while. The marks are made for salt that has already passed through many hands. A load is shoveled, carried, weighed or measured by basket, and then the count must become something smaller than the mound itself. A mark is easier to move than a heap. A line on paper can travel into a bill, a tax note, a port record, or a merchant's account. So the clerk listens as much as he writes. He hears the names spoken at the door, the scrape of boots, the soft clink of coins, the slap of damp rope against a cart side. He hears fatigue in voices after a morning in the pans. He hears pride too, though no one says it plainly. In Nantes, the salt trade belongs to water. The Loire carries boats, smells, fog and news, while the roads bring carts from the marsh country near Guérande and Bourgneuf. You stand in that meeting place with the clerk, where the sea has already done part of the work and the city finishes the counting. The tally marks that fit are not mysterious to the people who use them. They are strange only when seen too late, in an archive, after the hands are gone. A diagonal stroke might hold a number. A short cross might close a bundle. A little hooked mark might say that a portion was checked, shifted, owed, or settled. Your eyes begin to slow down over them. At first they are scratches. Then they become small decisions. The clerk is not decorating the page. He is making memory compact enough to survive the day. There is a comfort in work like this. The same names return. The same measures are repeated. The same careful marks sit in their columns. And by midday the page has the gentle density of a woven cloth. Dark threads of ink crossing pale paper in an order the hand understands before the mind speaks. The morning light comes higher, and now we move from the clerk's table toward the salt itself, where every tally begins as water, wind, clay, and waiting. The path from the office to the pans is not far in thought, though in the body it takes time. And we let it take time. You step out into the cool air, where the earth smells of salt, mud, cut grass, and the faint sourness of drying seaweed. The low banks run like narrow paths across the marsh. They are made by hands, repaired by feet, and kept in shape by the same quiet attention that later appears in the ledger. In the salt country feeding 1870s Nantes, the work begins long before the clerk sees a number. Brine moves slowly from one shallow basin to another, growing heavier as the sun lifts water away. You can see the surface change, not all at once, but by degrees, as glare gathers and the air tastes sharper. A wooden rake rests against a bank. Its handle has been polished by palms, rain, and years of use. The pan worker knows which pool is ready by color, smell, and feel. We might think of salt as white and finished, but here it begins as a shimmer, a faint skin, a crust that can break under careless touch. The worker steps lightly along the clay edge, and you feel how narrow the path is beneath your feet. On either side, still water holds the sky in pieces. The clerk's tally marks depend on that bodily knowing. If the brine is too thin, there is little to count. If the wind has been kind, there may be more than expected, and the page fills faster. In a damp season, the marks come slowly, and everyone understands why without much speech. Weather is part of the account, though it never signs its name. The salt is drawn with a long wooden tool, broad and flat at the end. You hear it whisper over the pan floor, gathering crystals without lifting too much clay. The sound is soft, almost papery, with a wet scrape underneath. When the tool turns, it leaves a line in the shining surface, and that line is the beginning of measure. A small heap forms on the bank, then another. The salt is not perfectly dry yet, and it holds together in loose, sparkling clumps. You can smell mineral water in it, and a little sun-warmed mud, and the sharp, clean scent that settles on lips when sea air has been blowing for hours. Hands lift, shake, smooth, and gather. The motion repeats until the body stops counting repetitions. By the time a cart arrives, the work has already become orderly. Baskets are set near the heaps. Sacks are checked for tears. The horse lowers its head and breathes into the grass, and its harness gives a small creak whenever it shifts. We stand near the wheel rut and watch how the whole place moves without hurry, because haste breaks edges, spills salt, and confuses accounts. Here is where the tally clerk's world begins to touch the marsh. A load must be named, and a named load must be remembered. In the 1870s, Nantes salt trade, a mark might stand for a measure agreed by custom, not by a stranger's neat theory. It might fit a basket size, a cartload, a tax unit, or a merchant's familiar reckoning. You learn the mark by use. The oddness of the tally marks comes from their closeness to life. They are not made for distant readers. They are made for wet hands, quick confirmation, and the need to keep trade moving while the weather changes. A long word takes time. A small sign can be placed before the ink dries on the clerk's cuff. We can feel the usefulness in that. The clerk may carry a pocketbook to the yard, or wait for slips to arrive at the table. Either way, he listens for the same facts. Who brought the load? Which pan yielded it? What measure was claimed? Whether the salt was coarse grey salt or finer white salt. Whether the heap was held back, sold forward, or moved towards storage. You can picture him lowering his head over the page, not because the room is secret, but because close work pulls the body inward. The pen is held with a small pressure between finger and thumb. Ink gathers at the nib. Then comes the stroke, clean and short, a mark that fits the column because the column was drawn for just that purpose. The marks fit physically as well as mentally. They sit inside narrow spaces without crowding the next account. They can be repeated in clusters. They can be checked at a glance by someone who knows the pattern. That is part of their quiet beauty. They are not grand writing. They are working writing, shaped to live under pressure from time, salt, money, and memory. As the morning opens, we stay with the marsh a little longer, because the slow birth of the salt explains the patience hidden inside every line of the Nantes ledger. The sun does not command the water. It only returns, day after day, and the worker makes use of its returning. The wind does not hurry for anyone. It crosses the pans, wrinkles the surface, and leaves its part behind. You may notice the sound of insects near the banks and the distant call of someone working 2 pans over. A gull passes without concern for the account books. Its shadow slips over the water and vanishes. The worker leans into the rake again. The salt draws inward like pale grain, and the ordinary day continues. In a place like this, routine is not small. Routine is the knowledge of where to step, when to wait, and when to lift. It is the habit of checking a basket before filling it, shaking the salt down before carrying it, and turning toward the cart with the same careful balance. You feel the body learn what the page later records. The tally clerk in 1870s Nantes receives only the final shape of this effort. Yet if he is any good, he knows the labor inside the numbers. He can hear it in the way a carrier speaks. He can see it in salt that arrives damp or clean, coarse or fine, heavy with weather or light from drying. His marks are small, but they rest on a large day. A cartload comes in with wet rims and packed salt crusted along the boards. The horse smells of sweat, leather, and rain. The driver has clay on his trouser hems and a red mark where the collar rubs his neck. He gives the amount, perhaps with a pause to remember the last basket, and the clerk checks it against the expected yield. There may be a wooden counter on the table, a little board with grooves, or a handful of small tokens used when talk outruns writing. We do not need to imagine anything ornate. The useful things are plain. A token can be moved from one side to another. A notch can be cut, a line can be drawn and crossed. The hand trusts objects that answer clearly. The phrase, tally marks that fit, begins to feel less strange when you watch the work. They fit because the day has already sorted itself into repeatable units. The pan, the basket, the sack, the cart, the account, the mark. Each part has a size, a place, and a sound in the mouth of the people who use it. The clerk gathers those sounds into signs. If you sit beside him long enough, your breathing may begin to follow the page. Dip, stroke, pause, listen, check, write. Dry the ink. Turn the page when the left column grows crowded. Outside, a door opens and closes, letting in salt air and the noise of wheels. Inside, the ledger keeps its quiet order. By mid-morning, the work draws us back from the pans to the counting room, where the strange little marks of 1870s Nantes begin to form rows, and the day becomes a pattern you can almost hear. The counting room has its own weather. It is cooler than the yard, with the smell of paper, old wood, damp wool, and a little lamp oil lingering from the previous evening. You settle into the chair beside the clerk. The seat is hard, but not unfriendly. It has held many hours, and it asks only that the body become patient. On the table, the ledger is ruled by hand. The lines are not perfectly even, though they are close enough for work. Some pages carry stains at the corners, where fingers touched them after handling salt bags or wet rope. The clerk turns them carefully, because paper costs money, and memory costs more. We notice that thrift has a sound, the dry lift of a page saved from tearing. The 1870s Nantes salt pan tally clerk may use terms that belong to his district, his employer, or the tax office. Some are formal, some are half-spoken, shortened by use. A measure in the marsh may not feel exactly like a measure on a printed form. So the tally mark stands between them, helping one world answer another without too much noise. You can see why a simple numeral might not be enough. The salt may be counted by weight, by volume, by container, by obligation, or by sale agreement. A mark can hold more than quantity. It can show condition, source, movement, or whether a count was accepted. In such work, the mark becomes a small folded thing, carrying several facts inside one gesture. The clerk's hand is trained by repetition. He makes a short vertical stroke, then a slant, then perhaps a cross or hook. He does not press too hard. A heavy hand blots the paper and slows the day. A too light hand fades under dust and time. The right pressure is a form of quiet craft, learned after many pages. If you watch the ink dry, it changes from shine to dullness. That tiny shift matters. A fresh mark can smear under a sleeve. A dry mark can be trusted. The clerk may sprinkle sand over it, then tip the page gently so the grains slide away. You hear the faint hiss of sand on paper, like a small tide in a wooden room. The tally marks that fit are also shaped by space. Columns are narrow, margins carry notes. A name may be long, but the mark beside it must be swift. We are used to printed forms with square boxes and official labels. Yet here much of the order lives in the clerk's eye. He knows where a sign belongs because the page has become familiar ground. There is comfort in a page like that. You know the upper corner where the date rests. You know the place for the pan name, the carrier, the amount, the balance. You know which marks tend to gather near harvest days and which appear after storage. In time, the page is less a surface than a room the mind can walk through. A worker comes in and removes his cap. He gives a name. The clerk looks up and the room holds a small pause. Perhaps both men know each other's habits. Perhaps the worker always speaks too quickly and the clerk always asks again, softly. The number returns clearer the second time. The pen moves and the mark settles into place. You might feel how human the whole exchange is. No machine keeps the account. No distant office hears the voice. There is only a person, another person, and a page that must remain honest enough for both. The clerk is not a judge in any grand sense. He is a keeper of agreements, and the work asks him to be steady. In 1870s Nantes, salt is ordinary and valuable at once. It seasons food, preserves fish, supports trade, and enters taxes and contracts. It sits on tables in small amounts, yet it moves through ports in large ones. That double life gives the tally clerk his particular quiet importance. He handles the moment where humble crystals become recorded value. The room may contain other sounds around him. A clock ticks with a dry wooden voice. A drawer opens. A chair leg taps the floorboards. From outside you hear a cartman calling to his horse, not sharply, just with the low tone of someone repeating a familiar instruction. The clerk keeps writing while the sounds pass through the walls. We can rest in these details because nothing here requires speed from us. The work has motion, but not frenzy. The ledger grows by small additions. A page is not filled by one dramatic act. It fills by returning to the same place, making one careful sign, then another, and letting the day gather itself into order. The clerk's lunch may wait wrapped in cloth near the window. A piece of bread, a little cheese, perhaps a small apple when there is one. The room smells warmer by then, touched by bodies and ink and the thin sunlight on the sill. He may eat without leaving the table if the loads are coming steadily. You sit near him, and the pause feels earned. Food in such a room is part of the work, not an escape from it. The clerk brushes crumbs away from the ledger, careful not to scatter them into the binding. He wipes his fingers on a cloth before touching the pen again. A smear of grease or salt can mark a page for years. Small care prevents long annoyance. The tally marks themselves may look like nothing to an outsider. A little ladder of strokes, a cluster of cuts, a bend like a bent reed. Yet when placed beside a name and a measure, they become exact enough. That exactness is not cold. It has been warmed by custom, argument, memory, and repetition until everyone at the table knows what is meant. Sometimes a mark must be corrected. The clerk may draw a fine line through it and place the right sign beside the first, leaving the error visible. This too is a kind of honesty. The page admits that hands can slip, voices can be misheard, and figures can change when a basket is checked again. You sense the relief of a mistake made plain. There is no need to make the work seem grander than it is. Its grace is in its plainness. The clerk writes, the worker waits, the mark dries, the page turns. Outside, salt crusts on wood and cloth, and inside, the signs of the day gather in brown-black ink. We are close enough now to hear the nib catch on a paper fiber. The phrase, weird 1870s Nantes salt pan tally, marks that fit, might have sounded like a curiosity at first, but in the room, it becomes the name of a practical piece. The marks fit the columns fit the trade fits the marsh, and the marsh fits the weather as well as any human arrangement can. By late morning, the counting room has become a soft machine of voices, paper, and remembered measures, and as the sun reaches the upper window, we turn toward the journey of a single load leaving the salt pans for Nantes. A load begins with weight before it becomes number. You see the cart bed lined with rough boards, pale salt gathered in uneven mounds against the sides. The crystals are not like clean table salt. They are grey-white, damp in places, with small bits of clay and the smell of tide caught inside them. When the shovel enters, it gives a low crunch. The cartman works with a rhythm that protects his back. He bends, lifts, turns, and lets the salt fall where the load needs it. You can hear the dull slide as each shovel load settles. The horse waits with patient ears. Its flank twitches at flies. Leather straps darkened by sweat give off a warm animal smell, mixed with hemp rope and old wood. In the Nantes salt trade of the 1870s, distance changes the work, but does not break its rhythm. The marsh gives the salt, the cart carries it, the clerk records it, the merchant receives it. We follow the load slowly, because each stage leaves its own trace, and the tally mark has to fit all those traces without becoming heavy. A basket might be filled first, then emptied into the cart, and the count of baskets becomes the cart's first memory. If the basket is standard enough, the mark can stand for its repeated shape. If not, the clerk must rely on trust, checking, and the practical knowledge of local hands. You begin to see why the best marks are neither too simple nor too fussy. The road from the pans is not smooth. Wheels sink after rain. Dry ruts harden in summer. Salt dust settles on boots and trouser cuffs. The cart moves with a soft groan of axle wood, and the load shifts slightly whenever the wheel drops into a hollow. You walk beside it in thought, hearing the same creak return again and again. There are pauses along the way. A strap is checked. A wheel pin is touched. The horse drinks when water is near enough and clean enough. The cartman may take bread from his pocket and chew without ceremony. We remain with him in the ordinary middle of the journey, where nothing much happens except the work continuing. By the time the load nears Nantes, the air begins to change. Marsh openness gives way to road dust, chimney smoke, damp stone, and the broad smell of the river. You may hear more wheels, more voices, perhaps the ringing of metal from a workshop doorway. The salt is still the same salt, but it has entered a place where many kinds of work press close together. Nantes in the 1870s is a city of movement. Boats come and go. Warehouses hold grain, timber, wine, cloth, and salt. Men carry ledgers under their arms. Women pass with baskets. Children notice the horse before they notice the load. The river binds these motions together, and the tally clerk's marks are part of that binding. A salt load reaching a depot or merchant yard must become legible to more than the cartman. Someone checks the amount. Someone notes the condition. Someone asks where it came from. The answer may travel from mouth to slip, from slip to ledger, from ledger to bill. At each step, a small sign prevents the load from becoming just a heap among other heaps. You stand by the weighing place, where wood, iron, rope, and human habit meet. There may be a balance large enough for sacks, or a measure used for repeated portions. The air smells of dust, salt, sweat, and river damp. A pulley squeaks. A sack thuds down. The clerk or another man working with him watches closely, without making a performance of attention. The tally marks that fit are especially useful here, where different records must speak to each other. A cart note may need to match a storage count. A storage count may need to match a sale. A sale may need to match tax or transport papers. We can imagine the satisfaction when the signs align, when the page and the pile agree. There is a quiet pleasure in agreement, not excitement, something gentler. The clerk checks a column and finds that the expected mark is already waiting where it should be. The numbers do not argue. The load is accepted. The driver can move on. The day loses a little friction, and everyone feels it, even if no one names it. But not every load fits at first glance. Salt can dry during waiting, or grow damp in fog. A basket may have been heaped higher in the morning than in the afternoon. A sack may tear. Some salt may be kept aside for a different grade. In such cases, the tally clerk's marks help make adjustment visible. They carry the story of difference without raising the voice. You might see a small side note, a mark tucked into the margin, or a crossing stroke that says the first count was not the final one. The page becomes a gentle negotiation between what was claimed, what was seen, and what could be accepted. This is one reason old records can look strange. They contain habits of fairness that were obvious only to the people present. The clerk's face may show very little while he works. He is listening, weighing, remembering. His calm is not emptiness. It is the trained quiet of someone who knows that a hurried reaction can make more work later. You sit near that calm, and it becomes part of the room. Even disagreement can move slowly if the page is clear. At a warehouse door, salt is carried inward. The floor is gritty. The light is dim after the open yard. Salt heaps rise in pale slopes, and sacks lean in rows like tired shoulders. The air dries the mouth. Every sound is softened by stored goods, yet footsteps still scrape on scattered crystals. You can taste the place just by breathing. Here the tally mark may be repeated on a tag, a chalkboard, a slip, or another ledger. Records multiply because goods move. Each mark is a small tether. It keeps the salt tied to its origin, its amount, its owner, and its next destination. Without such tethers, the warehouse would become confusion. With them, it becomes slow order. In 1870s Nantes, the port and the marsh are partners in this quiet accounting. The marsh works with sun and evaporation. The port works with storage and dispatch. The clerk's hand rests between them, translating one patience into another. We can feel how the tally marks fit because the whole system has learned to bend around them. The load may be destined for a fish curer, a grocer, a wholesaler, or onward transport. Salt is needed in kitchens, workshops, markets, and curing sheds. Its usefulness is broad, but its handling remains physical. Someone must move it. Someone must keep it dry. Someone must count it without losing track. The marks do not replace labor. They help labor remember itself. There is a moment after the cart is emptied, when the boards still hold a pale dusting. The cartman brushes it with a hand or scrap of sacking. He does not waste much. Salt is small, but many small losses become visible over time. The horse shifts again. The empty cart sounds lighter when it rolls away, and the clerk's mark remains behind. We pause with that difference. The cart is gone. The salt is stored. The mark stays. It is a little after-image of the load, a trace you could follow later if you knew the system. That is the strange tenderness of accounting. It holds a vanished action in a form plain enough to be used again. By early afternoon, the load has passed into storage and paper, and the work turns back toward the table, where the Nantes tally clerk begins the slow art of matching one record to another. Afternoon light is warmer on the desk. It falls across the ledger at a slant, showing raised fibers in the paper and tiny grains of dried sand near the binding. The room has grown used to itself. Ink, wood, cloth, and salt have mingled into one steady smell. You sit in that quiet blend, while the clerk draws a record closer. Matching is different from first writing. First writing follows the arrival of events. Matching looks backward and asks whether the events have kept their shape. The clerk compares a slip from the yard with the ledger line. He compares a cart count with a storage note. He compares one small sign with another, and the work becomes almost musical in its repetition. In 1870s Nantes, these salt pan tally marks have to fit across hands as well as pages. A mark made at the pan must be understood near the warehouse. A warehouse note must return meaning to the office. The same stroke may appear in slightly different handwriting, and the clerk must know the family resemblance beneath the change. You can imagine him pausing over a mark that leans more than usual. Is it a careless version of a known sign, or is it something else? He does not rush to decide. He looks at the name beside it, the amount, the day, the origin, and the neighboring lines. Context softens uncertainty. The page tells him more than the mark alone. The sound of afternoon work is lower than morning work. Voices have tired a little. The street outside is still active, but less sharp. A broom moves somewhere in the yard, making dry strokes over grit. The clock ticks on. The clerk wets the pen, wipes a speck from the nib, and returns to the comparison. This is one of the quietest parts of the job, yet it may be the part that holds the most care. To match records is to respect the labor already done. A wrong entry could cost a worker, confuse a merchant, or bring argument at the end of the week. A right entry lets everyone go on with less strain. You feel the worth of accuracy without any need to make it grand. The tally marks that fit often do so because they are economical. One sign can be made quickly and recognized quickly. It leaves room for names, notes, and corrections. It survives poor light better than a cramped word. When the afternoon dims and the eyes grow tired, a clear mark is kindness to the future reader. The clerk may keep a small scrap sheet nearby for figuring. He tests a sum there, perhaps with faint pencil, perhaps with ink if pencil is scarce or not preferred. The scrap is less formal than the ledger, but it carries the day's thinking. You might see repeated signs, partial totals, a name begun and crossed out, the temporary scaffolding of order. There is something soothing in temporary marks too. They are made to help and then disappear. They do not need to be beautiful. They only need to guide the hand toward the stable record. Many kinds of work have such hidden helpers, and when we notice them, we notice the human mind making little resting places for itself. A clerk in this trade might know far more geography than his desk suggests. He knows which pans tend to give coarse salt, which roads slow after rain, which families bring steady measures, which merchants press for delivery before a market day. The marks in the book are small, but the knowledge around them is broad and alive. We stay close to the work because it is easy to overlook. A ledger can seem dry until you understand that every line has weather behind it. Some marks carry bright days, some carry weeks of poor evaporation, some carry the heaviness of damp sacks, some carry a smooth season when the pans gave well and the office pages filled with contented regularity. In the afternoon, the clerk may turn to totals. He draws a line beneath a group of entries. The line is not decorative. It says this section is complete enough to stand. Then he gathers the marks above it into a sum that can be carried elsewhere. We watch the pen move slowly under the entries, closing one small piece of the day. A total has a different feeling from an entry. An entry is near the world. A total is one step removed, yet still faithful if the work has been done well. The clerk knows this. He does not let the total float away from the marks beneath it. He checks back. He counts again. The quiet page receives his caution. The strange fitting of the marks may include physical fitting into pre-ruled sections, but also mental fitting into the day's expected pattern. If a pan usually yields a certain range, and the mark implies much more, the clerk notices. If a cart's claim seems light after good weather, he notices that too. The marks speak against memory, and memory answers. You, sitting beside him, begin to learn the small alarms that are not dramatic. A pause, a second look, a finger returning to the previous line, a whispered name. These are the signs of careful work, not crisis. The room remains calm. The clerk simply gives more attention where more attention is needed. Outside the window, the river light may tremble on a wall. Nantes belongs to water, and even in the office that feeling remains. Barges, tides, rains, and damp seasons all make their way into trade. Salt seems dry, but its whole life is a conversation with water. The tally clerk writes at the edge of that conversation. There are old measures in the air, not only official ones. People keep words from their parents and grandparents. They use nicknames for places. They shorten the names of pans. The clerk must understand enough to translate without scolding the speech out of the workers. Good record keeping often depends on this gentle bilingual life between custom and form. The tally marks that fit may therefore be local in a deep way. They fit Nantes because Nantes is where the marsh salt arrives, where particular merchants ask particular questions, and where the Loire carries goods onward. A stranger might copy the marks and still miss their ease. The ease belongs to repeated use in a living place. At times, the clerk may sharpen a penknife and trim the nib. The knife is small, the blade darkened near the hinge. He holds the pen close, cuts a fine edge, and tests the line on scrap. You hear the quiet scrape of metal on quill or wood. It is a small maintenance, but without it the marks would thicken and blur. Tools like this do not announce themselves. They wait in drawers, pockets, and corners of tables. The penknife, the ruler, the sand shaker, the string around a packet of slips, the cloth for wiping fingers. Each one supports the page. Each one becomes familiar in the hand. We can almost feel their surfaces, worn by 1,000 small uses. The human detail in the afternoon is often fatigue, not misery, just the honest heaviness of steady attention. The clerk may roll his shoulders. He may look toward the window before returning to the ledger. His fingers may be stained near the nails. Salt dries the skin. Paper dust clings. Ink finds every small crease. You know this kind of tiredness, even if your work is different. It is the tiredness that comes from keeping things straight. It asks for patience more than strength. It makes a cup of water taste better. It makes the plain chair feel like a place. It turns ordinary silence into a companion. A worker enters with a question about a previous load. The clerk turns back several pages. The past is not far away in a ledger. It waits under the hand. He finds the date, then the name, then the mark. The answer is there because someone made the mark carefully when the moment was fresh. You can feel time folding gently back on itself. The worker leans in, perhaps not reading every word, but recognizing enough. The mark confirms what the clerk says. There is a nod, maybe a short word of thanks, maybe only the relaxation of a face that had expected difficulty. The page has done its quiet service. It has held a memory, so two people did not have to argue over it. That is one reason the marks matter. They are not merely administrative, they protect calm. They make the day more livable. By reducing the number of things that must be carried in the head, the clerk's ledger becomes a shared memory, and the tally marks are its simplest breathing parts. As afternoon lengthens, the entries slow, and we follow the clerk into the older stack of books, where the marks of previous seasons lie waiting like pressed leaves. Old ledgers have a different smell, more dust, more dry glue, more paper that has taken in years of air. When the clerk lifts one from the shelf, you hear the soft drag of a cover against wood. The binding may be rubbed at the corners. A label curls slightly. The book opens with the reluctance of something not often disturbed. In 1870s Nantes, the salt pan tally clerk may need yesterday's account, last month's balance, or the pattern from a previous season. The past is practical. It is not kept for sentiment alone. It helps settle questions, plan storage, confirm obligations, and remember which marks were used when a particular kind of salt passed through the books. You sit with him as he turns the older pages. The handwriting may belong to another clerk, perhaps an older man whose habits remain in ink after he has left the chair. Some strokes are firmer, some lean left, some marks are tighter, as though made by a cautious hand in cold weather. The differences are small, but the work continues through them. There is comfort in seeing one routine outlive one worker. The chair changes occupants. The marks remain understandable. The salt keeps coming when the season allows. The city keeps needing its records. We feel the human scale of it, not endless and not grand, but steady enough to give a life its frame. Older books may show changes in measure or practice. A mark that once appeared often may grow rare. Another may take its place. New paper forms may arrive from a central office, asking for cleaner categories than local trade prefers. The clerk adjusts, but not all at once. Work changes slowly when many hands depend on it. The weird tally marks that fit may preserve these slow changes better than formal statements do. A printed notice might say one thing. The ledger shows how people actually adapted. For a few weeks, two signs may appear side by side, then one fades. The page is patient with transition because pages do not require change to be tidy while it is happening. You may notice a stain on an older page, perhaps a round mark from a cup or a darker edge where damp entered the room one winter. The account remains readable. The stain becomes part of the book's body. It reminds us that records live in weather too. They are not above the world they describe. The clerk traces a column with his finger, not touching the ink if he can avoid it, but close enough to keep his place. His nail is trimmed short. His cuff is shiny from wear. The finger moves slowly down the page. Each mark it passes has already done its work, yet it remains available, like a tool put back on its peg. Old marks can also teach suspicion gently. If a present claim does not fit the pattern of past yields, the clerk may look again. He does not need to accuse anyone. The record simply asks for care. Perhaps the season was different. Perhaps the pan was repaired. Perhaps a measure was misheard. The ledger invites questions without raising its voice. We can rest inside that method. Look once. Look again. Compare. Ask quietly. Write clearly. These are not only office habits. They are ways of living with less confusion. In the warm hush of afternoon, the clerk practices them over salt. But the rhythm belongs to many kinds of patient work. The older books may contain names no longer heard at the door. A cartman retired. A family moved. A merchant died, and his son took over the account. The marks beside their names remain plain. There is tenderness in that plainness. The ledger does not mourn, but it preserves the shape of days that would otherwise be gone entirely. In Nantes, a city of stone, river, rain, and trade, Such books gathered in rooms that few people thought about. They were not displayed. They were used, closed, shelved, reopened, and used again. Their value was not in looking impressive. Their value was in answering when asked. You can feel that modest purpose in the weight of the cover. The clerk may copy a mark from an old line into a new note, making sure the meaning stays consistent. His hand joins another hand across time. The copied sign is not a flourish. It is continuity made visible. You watch it appear, and for a moment the room feels larger, filled with earlier mornings, earlier carts, and earlier piles of salt. There is no need to hurry through the stack. Each book has its own pace. Some open easily to worn sections. Others resist. A folded slip may fall out, and the clerk smooths it carefully. The paper may be thin and slightly brittle. It gives a dry whisper against the table. We listen, because small sounds make the room complete. The tally marks that fit also fit memory, because they are repeatable. A worker who cannot read long passages may still recognize the mark connected with his load. A clerk who inherits a book can learn the system by repeated exposure. A merchant can verify a settled account with less dispute. The mark becomes a common object, even though it is made of ink. In a world before instant copying, the act of writing is also the act of creating the record. There is no separate backup humming elsewhere. The clerk's concentration is the safeguard. The shelf is the archive. The dry room is the defense against loss. You understand why the window is watched in rain, and why damp corners are taken seriously. If the weather turns while the old books are open, someone may close the shutters part way. Damp air has a way of finding paper. The room darkens slightly. The clerk works nearer the light. The ink looks blacker in the dimness. Outside, a cart passes through wet street sound, and the wheels carry the smell of rain into the imagination. The salt trade has always belonged to weather, and the books prove it quietly. A poor season leaves fewer marks. A good one thickens the pages. Storms appear indirectly as delays, gaps, changes of condition, or notes squeezed near the margin. You begin to see weather not as a story outside the ledger, but as a hand that writes through other hands. The clerk may close the old book with both palms, pressing it gently so the cover settles flat. Dust lifts and catches light. He returns it to the shelf, aligning it with the others. This small act of order matters. Tomorrow, or next week, someone may need it again. A misplaced book is a kind of broken promise. We linger on the shelf for a moment. Rows of books, cloth and leather, faded labels, years compressed into inches. Each volume holds salt moved, counted, questioned, and settled. The marks inside are tiny, yet they connect marsh paths, warehouse floors, river barges, kitchen tables, and the steady hand of the person who wrote them. As the afternoon leans toward evening, the old books are closed, and the clerk returns to the present day, where fresh salt, fresh voices, and fresh marks still wait to be gathered. Evening does not arrive all at once in the counting room. It gathers in the corners first. The underside of the table darkens. The window glass turns cooler. The inkwell becomes harder to see into, though the clerk knows its depth by habit. You sit near the last good light, where the page still holds its lines. In 1870s Nantes, the salt pan tally clerk must finish the day in a way that tomorrow can trust. Loose slips cannot remain loose. Totals must be carried. Unsettled marks must be marked as unsettled, not left to guesswork. The end of a working day is not an ending so much as a careful handing forward. The late arrivals have a different feeling. People speak a little lower, tired from roads, pans, warehouses, and accounts. A man may lean one shoulder against the doorframe while he gives a figure. Someone may rub salt from his sleeve. The air smells of wool warmed by bodies, damp boots, and the last faint sharpness from open sacks. The clerk's hand is slower now, though not careless. Slowness can be accuracy when the day is long. He checks the name, repeats the measure, makes the mark, and waits for the ink to settle. You feel the quiet discipline in not rushing the final lines. A tired mistake at dusk can return as morning trouble. The tally marks that fit are especially useful at this hour. Their shapes are familiar enough to survive fatigue. The hand knows them when the mind is ready for supper. The eye sees when one is missing or out of place. A well-made system is merciful to tired people. and this small mercy matters after a day of salt and paper. A lamp may be lit before the work is done. The match gives a sulfur smell, brief and sharp, then the flame steadies behind glass. The room changes color, paper warms to cream, shadows sharpen along the ledger's binding. The clerk moves the lamp just far enough from the page to avoid heat, but close enough to keep the columns clear. Lamplight makes ink shine again. Fresh marks glisten for a moment before they dull. The clerk may tilt the page to see whether a line has dried. You can see the tiny wet edge catch the flame. Outside, the city lowers its voice, though not completely. Nantes still has wheels, footsteps, river sounds, and late work behind shuttered doors. End-of-day checking has a quiet ritual. Count the entries, compare the slips, tie the slips if they are to be kept. Place unfinished matters where they cannot be mistaken for finished ones. Wipe the pen. Cover the ink. Sand any page that needs it. Each act is small, but together they close the day without sealing it too tightly. The clerk may draw a final line beneath the day's entries. It is a resting line, not a dramatic one. Above it, the day has happened. Below it, tomorrow waits. The line helps the eye and calms the mind. You understand how much peace can live in one straight stroke placed at the proper time. There may be a cash box, though not every account is settled in coin at once. If coins are present, their sound is muted by the hour. Copper and silver touch wood. A thumb counts edges. The clerk's ear knows the difference between coin, key, and buckle. Offices have their own small music, and by evening you have learned some of it. The marks in the ledger may connect with receipts given out before the door closes. A receipt has to be clear enough for another table, another person, another morning. The clerk writes a name, a measure, perhaps a familiar sign, and tears or folds the paper. The receiver places it inside a coat or pouch. A tiny piece of the office leaves with him. You can imagine walking home with such a receipt, feeling it against your chest or tucked into a pocket. It is not heavy, but it carries proof. It says the salt was counted. It says the day's work entered the shared memory. For people whose labor is physical, a written mark can feel like the world admitting what the body has done. The 1870s Nantes salt pan tally clerk is not famous. He does not need to be. His usefulness is closer than fame. It is in the absence of confusion at week's end, in the settled account, in the load properly credited, in the warehouse knowing what it holds. We rest with that kind of usefulness, because it asks nothing loud from anyone. At dusk, the room may grow colder again. Heat leaves the walls. The clerk pulls his coat closer or rubs his hands before finishing a column. His fingertips may be rough from paper and dried ink. If he has handled salt slips all day, the skin near the nails may feel tight. You can almost feel the sting when he flexes his fingers. The last worker at the door may be someone known well. There is less ceremony now. A nod, a number, a correction, a quiet joke too small to disturb the room. Warmth in such places often comes indirectly. People do not explain their trust. They return, speak plainly, and expect to be recorded fairly. The ledger hears this trust line by line. The tally marks that fit carry social rhythm as well as commercial meaning. They fit because people have agreed to recognize them. They fit because disputes have shaped them. They fit because clerks, workers, merchants, and carriers have used them until their edges wore smooth. A mark is never only a mark when a community depends on it. Before closing, the clerk may review the day from top to bottom. His finger moves down the page again. Names, marks, measures, notes, totals. The review is slow enough for the eye to catch what the hand may have missed. You breathe with that descent, line after line, as though the page were a stairway being climbed carefully downward. A missing mark would show itself as a small gap. An extra one might make the column feel crowded. A total that does not fit would make the clerk return to the first entry and begin again. There is patience here, but also firmness. The page must be made right before the lamp is put out, if rightness is within reach. Sometimes rightness must wait. A note may say that a measure is to be confirmed, or that a load is held pending checking. The important thing is not to pretend uncertainty is certainty. The clerk gives uncertainty its own place. That too is order. You may find this gentle, because it allows the world to be unfinished without becoming careless. The office door opens once more, and evening air comes in with the smell of wet stone and river smoke. The lamp flame bends. A voice asks one last question. The clerk answers by turning back to a line already written. The tally mark is there. It fits. The question softens, and the door closes again. Now the room is nearly done with speech. The clerk stacks slips in a small square pile. He ties them with string, pulling the knot just tight enough. The string presses lightly into the paper edges. He places the packet in a drawer or box labeled by habit more than ornament. Tomorrow, that packet will still know where it belongs. We notice the cleaning, because cleaning is part of counting. Salt grains on the table can scratch paper. Sand used for drying ink must be brushed away. A pen left dirty hardens overnight. The clerk wipes, taps, folds, and aligns. These are not separate from the work. They are how the work is allowed to begin again. In the lamplight, the fresh page looks settled. The marks no longer seem odd. They sit where they should. Small dark signs holding a day's movement. If you had arrived only now, you might not know the marsh, the cart, the warehouse, and the voices behind them. But we have walked with them, and the page feels full of quiet company. As night comes nearer, the day's records are closed, but not forgotten, and we follow the finished marks outward into the sleeping city and back toward the salt pans that will wait for morning. The city after work has a softer edge. Shop shutters lower, hooves sound farther apart, river air thickens between buildings, carrying tar, damp rope, coal smoke, and the faint mineral breath of salt stored in nearby rooms. You walk with the thought of the clerk's ledger still open in your mind, even after the cover has been closed. In 1870s Nantes, the salt pan tally clerk's work does not shine from windows or call attention from the street. Yet it is present in many small certainties. A merchant knows what was received, a carrier knows what was credited, a storehouse knows what remains. These certainties move quietly through the evening like low lamplight under doors. The tally marks that fit now rest in darkness, but their usefulness continues. A closed ledger can still steady tomorrow. Its pages hold answers ready for morning questions. This is one of the calmest kinds of work, the kind that keeps serving after the hand has stopped moving. You can feel that restfulness in the thought of the book on its shelf. Out near the pans, night changes the salt fields into another place. The clay banks darken. Water reflects a few pale strips of sky. Tools are set aside, handles cooling in the air. The heaps that remain are covered or left according to need and weather. A worker's footsteps fade along the narrow path, careful even in tiredness. The marsh has sounds the office never hears directly. Frogs in wet ditches, insects near reeds, water moving through a small gate, a distant dog, the brush of fabric against grass as someone passes. You stand there in thought, with the city behind you and the open salt country ahead, and the ledger's marks seem less like office signs than echoes of this place. Salt pans are made from patience arranged in earth. Reservoirs, channels, evaporating basins, crystallizing pans, banks shaped and reshaped by hand. Nothing about them is accidental, though much depends on weather. The worker knows where the water must go. The clerk knows where the marks must go. Both jobs are forms of guiding flow. The phrase, "weird 1870s Nantes salt pan tally marks that fit," becomes almost a lullaby of work when repeated softly in the mind. Weird because they are old and local. Nantes because the city gathered the trade. Salt pan because the marks began in bright shallow water. Tally marks because memory needed a shape. That fit because daily life made room for them. At night, the pan worker's rake may lean against a shed wall, its blade pale with dried salt. If you touched it, it would feel rough in places, smooth in others, and cool from the evening air. The handle might smell faintly of wood, brine, and hands. Tools hold the memory of grip better than any written description can. The clerk's pen rests in a different darkness. It has been cleaned and placed where morning can find it. The ink is covered. The ledger is closed. The chair stands under the table. In these simple arrangements, we see the same impulse as in the pans. Leave the work ready for the next return. Let tomorrow arrive without unnecessary confusion. There is a softness in thinking of all the sleeping marks, not sleeping as people sleep, but resting without demand. They do not need attention every hour. They wait. They have been made clearly enough to wait. This is the gift of careful routine. It lets a thing be put down without being lost. The marsh and the office both depend on surfaces: water surface, clay surface, paper surface. The worker reads the shine of brine. The clerk reads the pattern of ink. You might not connect those acts at first, but both require the same patient eye, the same willingness to notice small changes before they become large mistakes. In the salt field, a thin crust can mean readiness. In the ledger, a small hook can mean settlement. In both places, meaning lies close to the surface, but only for someone trained to see it. We follow that training gently, without needing to master it. It is enough to know that hands once knew these signs as naturally as breathing. Night settles more deeply over the road between marsh and city. The cart ruts hold shadow. Grass along the banks smells damp and cool. Somewhere, a late wheel turns toward Nantes, perhaps carrying empty sacks, perhaps only a tired driver going home. The day's main loads are done. The road exhales. The tally clerk may be at his own table now, away from the office. He may eat soup, bread, potatoes, or whatever the household has prepared. His hands still remember the pen. His ears may still hold the day's repeated numbers. But gradually those echoes loosen. Work leaves the body slowly, like cold leaving a stone near the hearth. We do not need to intrude on his private room. It is enough to imagine the ordinary relief of sitting without recording anything. A spoon touches a bowl. A chair shifts. Someone speaks of weather, prices, a neighbor, a child, a repair needed before rain. The salt trade is still present, but softened into home life. The workers from the pans have their own evening quiet. Salt dries on cuffs. Feet ache from banks and paths. Shoulders remember lifting. A person might wash hands in a basin and see the water cloud slightly. The smell of brine may remain even after washing. Some kinds of work follow you kindly, refusing to vanish at the threshold. In Nantes, warehouses hold the day's salt under roofs. The heaps settle almost imperceptibly. Sacks lean into one another. The floor keeps the scrape marks of many loads. A night watchman may pass with a lantern, and the light moves over pale surfaces like slow moonlight. He may not know every account, but he walks among their physical forms. The clerk's ledger and the warehouse heap are two versions of the same day. One is weight and texture. One is ink and paper. Both are incomplete without the other. You can feel the calm of that pairing, the way a real thing and its record keep one another company through the night. The old tally marks are humble enough to be overlooked by anyone seeking drama. They ask us to come closer. They ask us to slow down until a stroke of ink becomes a gesture, and a gesture becomes a habit, and a habit becomes a whole working world. This is why we stay with them. They reward quiet attention. If you were to open the ledger again in the night, which we do only in thought, the page would have cooled, the ink would be fully dry, the day's slight waviness from handling would remain in the paper. Perhaps a few grains of sand would cling near a fresh line. The marks would sit there, no longer becoming, simply being. There is peace in a completed line. Not final peace, because trade resumes and questions return, but enough peace for sleep. The line says this part has been held. This part has a place. This part need not be carried in the mind through the dark hours. You can let the page carry it. As the night deepens, we return once more to the meaning of fit, not as a puzzle to solve, but as a quiet way of understanding how ordinary work finds its shape. Fit can mean the mark fits the box. It can mean the measure fits the basket. It can mean the load fits the account fits the season, and the season fits the memory of those who worked through it. In 1870s Nantes, the salt pan tally clerk lives among all these kinds of fitting. You see it in the way a basket sits against a hip. You see it in the way a shovel rests at the right angle against a cart. You see it in the way a ledger page leaves just enough room for totals. The world of work is full of such small agreements between object and body, body and habit, habit and record. The tally marks that fit are part of that world. They are not strange because people were careless. They are strange, because people were precise in a way that belonged to their place. The marks grew where they were needed, like worn steps on a stair. You understand them best by feeling the repeated passage of many feet. A worker does not think each time about how to lift the rake. The body remembers. The clerk does not invent each mark anew. The hand remembers. The cartman does not study every rut. The wheel remembers, and so does the horse. We rest in this shared remembering, where skill is quiet because it has become familiar. There is science here, but it is not abstract. Evaporation, crystallization, weight, moisture, friction, ink drying in air, paper swelling with damp. These are real processes, but in the script of the day they appear through touch, sight, smell, and practical judgment. You feel them before you name them. A salt pan is a shallow instrument played by sun and wind. The worker tunes it with gates, channels, and timing. Too much water, and the crystals do not gather. Too little care, and the pan floor is disturbed. The job rewards attention paid calmly over time. It punishes haste by making more work. The ledger is another instrument, played by voice and hand. Too little detail, and memory fails. Too much clutter, and the page becomes hard to read. The clerk tunes the record with columns, marks, and repeated forms. When it works, the page is quiet. It does not show off its success. It simply answers. You can hear the connection in the words of the day. Count, carry, check, dry, turn, tie, store, return. None of these words is dramatic. Together, they make a life of work. Together, they carry salt from shining water to dark shelf, from hand to hand, from season to season. The weirdness of the old marks fades as our attention warms to them. They become intimate instead. A short slash is not merely a slash. It is the clerk's wrist moving at dusk. It is a cart that arrived after rain. It is a basket counted by someone tired but careful. It is the practical poetry of keeping track. In a modern glance, we might want everything translated into neat figures. Yet some of the old richness would be lost if we flattened the marks too quickly. They belong to a system where local knowledge mattered, where a sign could be compact because the people around it shared the missing context. You can let that remain partly mysterious without feeling shut out. Not every mystery needs to be solved sharply. Some can be held softly. The mark fits, and that may be enough for tonight. It fit the hand that made it. It fit the column. It fit the trade. It fit the rhythm of salt leaving the pans and entering the life of Nantes. Our understanding can rest there for a while. The night air over the pans grows cooler. Moisture returns to the surfaces. If tomorrow brings sun, the work will begin again with inspection, adjustment, waiting and gathering. If rain comes, the rhythm changes. The tally clerk's page will show the difference later, perhaps through fewer marks, perhaps through notes of delay. Weather will have spoken, and the ledger will listen. Inside the office, darkness holds the table. A little salt dust may remain in a seam of wood. The chair is pushed in. The shelf of ledgers rests against the wall. The closed inkwell keeps its blackness to itself. Nothing moves except perhaps the faint settling of boards as the building cools. You can imagine the first morning light finding the room again. It will touch the window, the table edge, the spine of the ledger. Someone will open the door. Air will enter. The clerk will return, hang his coat, uncover the ink, and place yesterday beside today. The old marks will make room for new ones. That is the great gentleness of repetitive work. It does not require the world to be remade each morning. It asks only that the necessary things be found again. The pen, the ledger, the pan, the rake, the basket, the road, the voices, the marks. Each waits in its place, ready to become useful through touch. We stay with that waiting because it is restful. A thing in its place gives the mind somewhere to settle. The tally marks are in their columns. The salt is in its store. The tools are against the wall. The pans lie under the night. You are not asked to solve anything quickly. You are only invited to notice how carefully the day has been set down. When morning returns to the salt fields, it does not hurry. The first light is thin and bluish over the water, and the clay banks look darker than they will by noon. A worker steps onto the path. testing the ground with the knowledge of someone who has slipped before and remembers. The air smells of damp earth, brine, and grass. The Nant clerk is not yet at the marsh, perhaps not ever that morning, but his future page is already beginning there. Every closed gate, every opened channel, every glance at the sky may later become part of what he records. You feel how the ledger begins before ink, just as salt begins before crystals. Both start in attention. A wooden gate is lifted or lowered in a narrow channel. Water slides through with a small private sound. It is not a rushing sound. It is a careful one, guided by boards and mud and long experience. The worker watches the level change, a little more, then enough. The gate returns to place. That decision may affect the day's harvest. Too much brine moved too soon, and the pan will not be ready. Too little, and the sun's work is wasted. The pan worker's judgment is measured later in salt. But at the moment, it is measured only by sight, touch, and trust. You stand close enough to see the wet shine on the gate handle. The tally clerk's marks fit this world because they respect sequence. First water, then thickening, then crystals, then gathering, then carrying, then counting, then storing. The mark near the end contains the patience of all the earlier steps. It is small because the work behind it is large enough already. As the sun lifts, the pan's surfaces begin to brighten. Not white yet, not finished, just a growing shine. Birds cross low over the marsh. A distant church bell may reach faintly, softened by air and distance. Someone calls a greeting from another bank. The reply is brief, because too many words are not needed among people who know the morning. You notice the clothing as part of the work. Sleeves that can be rolled, trousers that can take mud, shoes or boots suited to narrow, wet paths, a hat against glare, cloth at the neck. Salt work dresses the body in practical layers, and the body gradually shapes them. Fabric creases where bending repeats. When the worker touches the brine, the fingers know coolness first. Later the day may bring heat, glare and dryness. Morning is still gentle. The water has not yet given up much of itself. We linger here because the tally marks of Nantes, resting in their office lines, come from this unhurried transformation of water into something that can be shoveled, stored, sold, and remembered. The salt pan worker may keep few written notes personally, or none. His knowing is held in place names, path habits, weather memory, and the daily look of the pans. The clerk's knowing is held differently, in names, marks, dates, and totals. Neither form is complete alone. Together, they make the trade possible. A good pan worker can see trouble in a surface before a visitor sees anything at all. A ripple in the wrong place, a color too dull, a bank edge that has softened, a patch where crystals gather unevenly. The worker adjusts. Later, if the yield changes, the tally clerk may see only the result. But the marsh has already told its story. There is a kinship between checking a pan and checking a ledger. Both require a steady eye moving over a familiar field. Both notice what breaks pattern. Both depend on memory of yesterday. You feel that kinship in the calm, repeated motions, the way the worker bends toward water and the clerk bends toward paper. By full morning, the office opens again, and the first fresh voices of the day bring the marsh back into Nantes through words, slips, and those small fitting marks. The clerk enters the room with the slight heaviness of someone returning to known work. He may set down a cap, smooth his sleeve, and glance at the closed ledger before opening it. Morning air follows him in. It smells cleaner than the room, carrying stone dampness, river breath, and the faint smoke of breakfast fires from nearby streets. He opens to the place after yesterday's final line. This is a simple act, but it has grace. Yesterday remains above. Today begins below. The page has accepted the passage of time without needing much ceremony. You sit near the edge of the table, where the light falls well enough to see the first ruling. In 1870s Nantes, the first marks of a salt pan tally clerk may come before the room is fully warm. The ink moves a little differently in cool air. The hand may be stiff at first. A pen that wrote smoothly yesterday must be tested again today. Nothing is assumed until it works under the present conditions. The first visitor gives a small report. Perhaps it concerns a stored load from yesterday, or a pan expected to send salt by noon. The clerk writes a note, not yet a full tally. The page begins with anticipation. Some days start with arrival, others start with waiting. The ledger has room for both, if the clerk is honest about the difference. You can feel the comfort of preparation. The ruler lies straight, the slips are stacked. The old total has been carried correctly. The ink is dark enough. The chair holds its familiar angle to the table. These details may seem minor, but they reduce the day's roughness. Good routine is a kindness paid in advance. Soon a cart note arrives, folded once and handled by several fingers. The paper is slightly damp at one corner. The clerk unfolds it carefully. A mark appears there, made perhaps in haste near the yard or pan. It is not elegant, but it is recognizable. He copies or confirms it in the ledger, placing the official version where it belongs. The tally marks that fit must be flexible enough for rough travel. A perfect mark in a perfect book is one thing. A mark made on a slip against a cart side, in wind or mist, is another. The system survives because the signs remain clear even when life handles them roughly. That durability is part of their design, whether anyone ever called it design or not. The clerk may compare the slip with a verbal report. He does not distrust speech, but he knows speech floats away. Writing stays, though it can be wrong. So the two are brought together. The voice steadies the slip steadies the voice. The ledger receives the agreed shape. You can hear the quiet click of order forming. A small disagreement may arise over whether a portion belongs to one account or another. The names are close. The pans are near each other. The load was divided. Such things happen in ordinary trade. The clerk asks questions in a low tone. He turns a page. He looks back to an earlier note. The answer slowly gathers. No one needs to become dramatic. The day is too practical for that. A mistake, once located, becomes work rather than insult. The clerk alters the account visibly, or adds a note that will prevent confusion later. The tally mark is placed in the right column, and the people in the room return to breathing normally. That return to calm is one of the hidden services of the job. The clerk's steadiness gives others somewhere to place their uncertainty. He cannot change the weather, improve a road, or dry damp salt by wishing, but he can keep the record from adding unnecessary trouble. We feel the quiet dignity in that limit. The morning grows busier. Footsteps approach and recede. The door latch lifts often enough that the room never quite settles, yet the clerk's movements remain measured. He dips the pen, writes, sands, compares, and turns. The sounds repeat until they become almost sleep-like, a soft cycle of attention and release. The smell of salt becomes stronger when sacks or clothing pass close to the desk. Salt has a dry brightness even when damp. It sharpens the air. Mixed with ink and wool, it makes a smell that belongs only to this kind of room. You might not notice it after an hour, but if you left and returned, it would meet you at once. In Nantes, the salt trade is part of a wider river world, but the tally clerk's attention stays close. He does not need to think about every destination while writing each mark. He thinks about this line, this name, this load, this sign. The larger system depends on such narrowing. Big movements are made from small accuracies. A worker's hand rests on the table edge while he waits. The nails are rimmed with clay. The skin is rough, perhaps cracked near the knuckles. The clerk's hand, stained with ink, looks different, but no less shaped by work. For a moment, both hands are near the ledger, and the page belongs to both kinds of labor. The tally marks that fit seem to join those hands. One hand gathers and carries. One hand records. The mark sits between them. Dark and brief, it does not erase the difference between their tasks, but it lets them agree on what has passed from one stage to another. You can rest in that small bridge. As the morning presses toward noon, the page thickens with fresh entries, and we move again toward the human pauses inside the work. The meals, silences, habits, and small comforts that keep the day gentle enough to bear. Noon comes into the counting room quietly, not as a bell in every place, but as a change in the way people hold themselves. Shoulders lower a little. Voices become less exact for a moment. The clerk hears footsteps pause outside the door, and you can feel the day loosen one notch, as though even the ledger understands that hands need bread before they can keep making sense. A meal in the middle of this work is plain and useful. Bread may be torn rather than sliced, and cheese may be eaten with a small knife wiped carefully before the page is touched again. The clerk keeps crumbs away from the binding, because a book used every day must be treated almost like a tool with moving parts. You sit beside him and notice how even rest has its small order. In 1870s Nantes, a salt pan tally clerk does not leave the salt trade when he eats. The taste of the room remains on the hands, and a little salt may be on the bread before any is added on purpose. Outside, someone laughs softly near a cart, and the sound is carried in with the smell of horse, mud, and river air. The page waits, open but undemanding. The weird tally marks that fit have paused too. They stand in the morning columns like little fence posts along a road already walked. Some are sharp and recent. Some have dried flat into the paper. The clerk glances at them while chewing, not to work exactly, but because the eye goes where habit sends it. You know that feeling, when the mind keeps touching its task, even during rest. There may be a cup beside the lunch cloth, perhaps water, perhaps weak wine, perhaps coffee if the household or office habit allows it. Whatever it is, the cup must be kept away from the ledger. A ring of moisture could blur a mark, and a blurred mark could cost time later. The clerk has learned these precautions without making a show of them, the way one learns to step around a loose board. The worker outside eats differently, perhaps sitting on a low wall or cart shaft, using his knee as a table. His clothes smell of sun and brine, even when the sun is hidden. He may speak with another man about a pan that crusted well, or a bank that needs repair, or a merchant who counts closely. We listen to these low voices as part of the same account, though no pen records them. A midday pause reveals how much of working life is not the named task, but the little acts that make the task possible again. Wiping a knife, folding cloth, resting eyes, rolling shoulders, checking the sky, listening for the return of carts. The tally clerk is still the tally clerk during these moments, but he is also simply a person in a room, letting the body settle before the next column fills. The salt pans around Nantes and the marsh districts beyond it do not stop because a clerk eats, and the water continues its slow work under the open sky. Evaporation has no lunch hour. Wind keeps crossing the shallow basins, and crystals continue forming or failing according to light, damp, and temperature. You feel how human schedules rest lightly on top of older rhythms. After food, the hand can return to its steadiness. The clerk brushes his fingers, checks them, and takes up the pen again. The first mark after a pause is made carefully, as though reminding the muscles of their duty. Ink flows, the nib scratches, the ledger resumes its breathing. There is no announcement, only a return. By early afternoon, the room fills again with the steady work of proof, and we follow the strange Nantes tally marks into the agreements, taxes, and obligations that made each little sign matter. An account is never only a count when salt is involved. Salt has long belonged to households, fisheries, merchants, and governments, and each has wanted its portion recognized clearly. In earlier French life, salt taxes had carried heavy memory, and even after old systems changed, the habit of careful recording remained. The clerk in 1870s Nantes works in the shadow of that history without needing to speak of it every hour. You can imagine how a simple load becomes several questions. Who owns the salt? Who gathered it? Who transported it? Has it been sold already? Is a fee due? Is it being stored, transferred, or prepared for another buyer? The tally mark must fit into that web, not by explaining everything, but by pointing to the right place in the record. The office grows quieter when such matters are checked. The clerk's finger moves slowly over one line, then another. A slip is turned sideways. A name is repeated under the breath. You hear the soft drag of paper on wood and the faint rasp of a sleeve against the table edge. The whole room seems to lean toward accuracy. These marks are strange to us because we come to them after the living agreements have gone silent. But to the people around the table, they are shorthand for relationships as much as quantities. A mark may signal that salt belongs to a certain merchant's lot. Another may show that a measure has been verified. Another may separate coarse grey salt from cleaner white salt intended for a different use. In Nantes, the river makes paperwork necessary because movement multiplies claims. Goods arrive, shift, divide and leave. Salt can be sold in part, stored in part, or sent onward in a consignment with other goods. We stay with the clerk as he keeps these changes from dissolving into confusion. His marks are anchors dropped into a moving current. A tax clerk, merchant's clerk, or warehouse keeper may need to understand the account later. That later reader may not know the smell of the morning pan or the face of the cartman. He will know the page. The mark must carry enough shared meaning to survive the absence of the original voices. You can feel the responsibility in that small black sign. Sometimes the account requires a duplicate. The clerk writes the same essential fact twice, once in the main book and once on a loose paper or secondary register. Duplication is slow, but it protects memory from loss, travel, and argument. The second mark resembles the first, though the hand never makes two gestures exactly alike. This slight difference is part of its humanity. If the day is humid, paper accepts ink more slowly. The clerk waits or uses sand with extra care. A hurried fold could print a mark onto the opposite page, creating a ghost sign where no sign belongs. You see why patience is practical here. The slow breath between writing and closing a book may prevent an hour of confusion later. The weird tally marks that fit belong to this gentle discipline. They fit not only because they are clever, but because they have been tested by damp paper, tired eyes, long names, and repeated use. A sign too complex would fail at dusk. A sign too simple would confuse one category with another. The mark that remains is the one that survives ordinary conditions. The clerk may keep a separate list of accepted forms, or he may keep them mostly in memory, taught by older clerks and corrected by use. Apprenticeship in such work is often quiet. A younger person watches before being trusted with the book. He learns when to ask, when to wait, and when a mark that looks odd is still perfectly correct. You sit with that patience, because learning slowly is part of the atmosphere. An older clerk might point with the back of the pen rather than the inked tip. He might say, softly, that this stroke must lean farther, or this crossing must sit higher, or that a certain sign belongs only after checking. The instruction is small but exact. The apprentice repeats it on scrap. The old hand watches without hurry. We can imagine the scrap paper covered with practice marks, some awkward, some improving. They are not meant to last. They are the soundless exercises behind competent work. Every smooth ledger line has such hidden repetition somewhere behind it. The clerk's calm hand did not arrive fully formed. It was trained through error, correction, and many ordinary afternoons. The body learns the signs before the mind can explain them neatly. After enough practice, the hand begins a stroke almost before the full word has finished in the ear. That is not carelessness. It is fluency. You may know it from tying a knot, folding cloth, trimming bread, or finding a familiar key in darkness. Work enters the muscles and becomes reliable. In the salt office, reliability feels like quiet. The clerk does not celebrate each correct entry. He simply continues. A worker gives a figure, a mark appears, the ink dries, another figure follows. This modest continuity is what gives the day its soothing rhythm, and we can rest beside it without needing every detail to become exciting. Yet the details remain rich when we look closely. The ledger paper may have slight ridges from the mold used to make it. The ink may feather a little on cheaper sheets. The pen nib may split too wide after long use. The clerk adjusts pressure and angle, making the same mark differently depending on the material beneath his hand. This is why old records carry texture. They are not just information, they are collisions between intention and paper, between rule and weather, between hand and hour. The tally marks that fit in Nantes fit through all of that. They are practical marks, but practicality itself can be beautiful when seen close enough. A merchant arrives in better cloth than the pan workers, but the room does not transform for him. His coat may smell of wool, rain, tobacco, or warehouse dust. He asks for a balance. The clerk turns to the proper page. You hear the slight change in tone, formal, but not cold. The ledger becomes the shared ground between people whose work touches salt differently. The merchant may care about totals more than individual loads, while the worker cares whether a particular delivery was credited properly. The clerk must serve both kinds of attention. He keeps the lines small enough for a load and broad enough for an account. His marks are hinges between scale and scale, between basket and balance sheet. In 1870s Nantes, such hinge work happens all over the city. Dock clerks, grain measurers, customs men, warehouse keepers and shop accountants make their own marks and entries. But the salt pan tally clerk has this particular scent of brine around his work, this connection to shallow pans shining beyond the city, this fine dust that dries on cuffs and pages. We return often to the smell, because smell keeps the world close. Ink alone would make a schoolroom or office. Salt alone would make a storehouse or coast. Together with damp wood, wool, lamp oil, and river air, they make this room. You can breathe it in slowly and let the scene hold its shape. As the afternoon deepens, numbers begin to gather into balances, and the work turns toward the careful question of what remains, what has moved, and what still waits in the stores. The warehouse is cooler than the street at first, then warmer in pockets where air does not move. Salt heaps stand under a film of dust and light. Sacks lean along the walls, tied with rough cord. Wooden bins hold different lots, and small labels or chalk marks help keep them apart. You follow the clerk, or his note, into that dimmer space where the written count meets the stored thing. A warehouse keeper may lift a lantern or open a shutter to improve the light. Dust turns slowly in the beam. The floor crunches underfoot where stray crystals have fallen. You can feel the grit through the sole, and you can hear it when someone shifts weight. The smell is stronger here, dry and mineral, with old rope, timber, and the faint, damp breath of the river pressing through cracks. The Nantes tally marks must fit the warehouse arrangement too. A sign in the ledger may correspond to a stack by the north wall, a bin near the door, or a lot held for a particular buyer. If the mark cannot lead someone to the right salt, it has failed one of its quiet duties. So the mark and the room learn each other. Checking a store is slower than looking at a page. Bodies must move. Sacks may be counted by hand. A heap may be estimated, measured, or partly weighed. The keeper bends, touches, counts and calls back. The clerk or assistant notes the response. We feel the rhythm stretch from desk work into physical space. Salt in storage changes subtly. Damp air can make it clump. Dry air can make it settle. Some grains cling to sacking, and some spill each time a sack is moved. The account must allow for real material behavior without becoming vague. That is why experience matters. You cannot keep salt honestly if you know only figures and never touch the goods. A sack is dragged slightly away from the wall. The sound is a heavy rasp. A cord is checked. The cloth feels rough, stiffened by mineral dust. The keeper presses the side to judge fullness. A small puff of salt dust rises and catches in the throat. Someone coughs once, quietly, then returns to counting. The weird tally marks that fit seem less weird in the warehouse, because everything here is labeled by necessity. A sign saves time when light is poor. A repeated mark keeps lots distinct when sacks look alike. A simple stroke can prevent a wrong removal. We see again how compact signs grow naturally in places where goods must be handled by tired people. You may notice that the warehouse has its own map, known more by memory than by drawing. The path between bins, the dry corner, the place where the roof once leaked, the stack that must be moved first. The clerk's page is another map. Together, the page and building let people navigate stored labor. If a shortage appears, no one needs to assume bad faith at once. Salt settles. Sacks tear. Measures differ. A previous note may have been entered under the wrong lot. The clerk checks before deciding. His work teaches delay between noticing and accusing. That delay is a form of peace in commercial life, and it lets facts gather before judgment hardens. The warehouse keeper may bring out an older tag, stiff and stained. The writing is faded, but a mark remains clear. The clerk compares it with the ledger. The same sign appears, perhaps in a neater hand. A small satisfaction passes through the room. The lot is identified. The account holds. The air seems to settle with the salt. In Nantes, goods often pass through several hands before reaching their final use, and each hand leaves some trace. Chalk on a board, ink in a ledger, a knot in a cord, a tag through a sack, a verbal promise remembered until written. The tally marks are part of this web of traces, humble but necessary, There is quiet skill in knowing which traces to trust. Chalk can be wiped away, tags can be torn, voices can misremember, ledgers can be wrong if copied badly. The clerk does not worship the page, he uses it alongside other evidence. We stand with him in that balanced attention, where trust and checking are not enemies. A balance is struck again and again. Too much suspicion slows the work. Too little care invites error. The good clerk carries a middle temperament, patient, observant, hard to fluster. He asks the same question twice, if needed. He accepts correction when proof is clear. He writes in a way tomorrow can understand. The tally marks that fit are outward signs of that temperament. They are small, consistent, and calm. They do not sprawl. They do not crowd. They do not try to explain themselves to strangers, yet they serve the people who must use them. A good mark has manners, in a way. It takes only the space it needs. Back in the counting room, the warehouse check becomes an adjustment or confirmation. The clerk writes with the slightly heavier attention that follows physical inspection. The mark now holds not just a reported load but a seen store. Its meaning has been strengthened by footsteps, dust, and the keeper's call from the dim aisle. You can feel how the day layers itself. Morning reports, noon pauses, afternoon checks, warehouse confirmations. Each layer touches the same salt differently. The ledger is not a flat thing anymore. It is stratified like the work itself, with marks that show where the day has been handled, lifted, questioned, and settled. A young assistant, if present, may be sent to carry a note, fetch a book, or confirm a tag. He moves quickly at first, then learns to move carefully, because speed that drops a paper wastes more time than it saves. You see him return with salt dust on his sleeve, pleased to have found the right stack. The clerk receives the note without excessive praise, but with a nod that says the work is accepted. The assistant will remember that nod. Small acknowledgements teach belonging. In quiet jobs, one often learns by being trusted with modest tasks and completing them well. The world does not stop to applaud. It simply gives the next task. There is comfort in that, when the tasks are fair and the rhythm is human. The warehouse door closes behind us, and the street seems brighter after the dim salt air. Nantes is still moving. A cart of timber passes. A woman carries a basket covered with cloth. A dog sleeps near a wall. Somewhere a hammer strikes metal at long intervals. The salt account returns to the office among all these other ordinary motions. As the stores are checked and the balances settle, the work turns toward repairs, weather notes, and the practical memory of the salt pans themselves, because every fitted mark depends on the fragile earthworks outside the city. The salt pans are not permanent in the way stone buildings pretend to be permanent. Banks crack, channels silt, wooden gates swell, warp, or loosen. Rain cuts edges, and feet wear paths lower. The pan worker spends many hours maintaining the place where salt can happen. You walk beside him and notice that production and repair are not separate lives. A clay bank underfoot has a dense, cool feel. When damp, it gives slightly. When too dry, it can crumble at the edges. The worker may carry a shovel, a wooden mallet, or a simple scraping tool. He presses clay back into shape, smoothing the side with practiced strokes. The sound is soft, thick, and earthy, different from the crisp scrape of salt gathering. In the Nantes salt records of the 1870s, a repair may appear indirectly as a delay, a reduced yield, or a note beside a pan name. The tally clerk does not need to describe every lump of clay, but his marks live downstream from such work. If a bank fails, fewer marks follow. If a repair holds, the page may return to its familiar rhythm. You can smell the difference between wet clay and drying salt. Clay is darker, heavier, almost green in its dampness. Salt is brighter in the nose, sharper and cleaner. When both are near, the marsh smells layered, like tide water, earth, sun, and labor. The worker's hands carry all of it, and later the cart brings part of that smell into the city. A water gate may be repaired with wood worn smooth at the edges. The worker tests it by moving it slowly, listening for the scrape that means it sits properly. A bad fit wastes brine. A good fit holds level. The word fit returns again, not as a puzzle, but as a practical condition of the whole trade. Nothing counts well unless the physical world fits first. The tally marks that fit are cousins to these gates and banks. A gate holds water in the right place. A mark holds meaning in the right place. A bank separates one pan from another. A column separates one account from another. We do not force the comparison. We simply notice how work creates similar shapes in earth and paper. Weather notes may be informal, spoken more often than written. People remember a wet week, a fine wind, a foggy morning that delayed drying. The clerk may hear these remarks and understand why figures change. A ledger is more than arithmetic when the person keeping it knows the world outside. Numbers without weather would be thinner. If a storm comes from the west, the pans may lose a day or more. Rain softens what sun had prepared. Workers check banks, clear channels and wait. Waiting is not idleness here. It is attention without harvest. You stand in that grey patience, hearing rain stipple the water surfaces, and you know the ledger in Nantes will have fewer marks because of this sound. After rain, the first good day brings careful inspection. The worker looks for damage and for recovery. He may lift debris from a channel, press a footprint closed, or skim unwanted water. The body moves with resignation, but not despair. Weather has always been part of the bargain. The salt pan teaches people to begin again without speeches. The clerk may enter a smaller total that week, and the mark may sit in the page with more blank space around it. Blank space is information too. It tells of rain, waiting, disrupted rhythm, and the limits of human planning. You can rest with that idea, because it is gentle and true. Not every empty place is failure. Sometimes it is weather. In warmer stretches, the opposite happens. The pans give more. The carts come steadily. The office grows busier. The clerk's hand must keep pace without losing neatness. A good season has its own strain, the strain of abundance needing order. The tally marks that fit must stretch across both scarcity and plenty. A plentiful day brings more sensory detail into the office. More boots at the door. More salt dust on clothes. More slips stacked near the ledger. More voices speaking over one another until the clerk asks for order. The room smells stronger. The sand shaker is used more often. The page darkens with entries and the day feels full but still contained. A pan worker on such a day may feel satisfaction in the body. The rake gathers well. The crystals respond. The heaps rise cleanly. The cart fills. The worker knows that not every day gives this ease, and so the ease is accepted with quiet gratitude. We see no need for excitement. The pleasure is in the work answering the hand. The clerk's corresponding pleasure is the page answering the system. A line of marks fits cleanly down the column. Totals agree. Slips match. Loads are credited. The work has weight, but it does not tangle. If you have ever finished a repetitive task cleanly, you know this pleasure. It is modest and deeply restful. Repairs also belong to tools. A rake tooth may split. A basket handle may fray. A cardboard may loosen. In the office, a pen may crack. A ruler edge may wear. A ledger binding may need mending. Work is always accompanied by the care of the things that make work possible. You notice that nothing useful stays useful without attention. A basket being mended has a dry, fibrous smell. The worker threads or tightens the material, testing it with a tug. The basket must hold salt without spilling through a weakened side. Its size may matter for measure as well as carrying. If the basket changes too much, the count may change. Thus even repair has a counting inside it. The tally clerk understands standard objects as part of standard records. A measure is not just a word. It may be a container, a habit of filling, a practiced level at the top. If people heap salt differently, the account suffers. So custom teaches the hand how full is full enough. The fitted mark depends on this shared physical discipline. A cart repair can alter timing. If a wheel fails, a load is late. If an axle complains, the driver stops. The ledger may show the delay only as an entry made later than expected. But we, walking through the process, hear the wooden groan and see the driver crouched near the wheel, hands blackened by grease and road dirt. This is why slow narration suits such work. The system is not a single event. It is a fabric of small continuities, each one ordinary and necessary. A tightened cord, a cleared channel, a sharpened nib, a checked mark, a closed drawer. When we slow down, the hidden strength of the fabric becomes visible. As weather, repair, and routine fold back into the accounts, the afternoon begins to carry us toward the people who read the marks after the clerk, the buyers, keepers, and workers who trusted the page to remember. A buyer does not always need to know how the mark was born. He may only need the assurance that a lot of salt has been received and counted. Still, the mark carries the marsh into his transaction, whether he notices or not. When he looks at the page, he sees a quantity. We see the clay paths, the bright pans, the cart road, and the clerk's careful hand. In a shop or curing house, salt has another life. It is scooped into smaller measures, rubbed into fish, poured into barrels, or sold to households. The crystals that once lay in a shallow pan now meet wood staves, knife handles, market cloth, and kitchen fingers. The original tally mark may be far away, but it helped the salt arrive in trustable form. Nantes and its surrounding trade depend on such chains of trust. No one person sees everything. The pan worker may never see the final household. The household may never see the pan. The clerk sees neither every origin nor every destination, but he keeps the crossing point steady. You feel how quiet jobs make large systems livable by tending one narrow place well. A fish curer receiving salt may test it by eye and hand. Too damp, and it handles poorly. Too dirty, and it may not suit finer work. Coarse salt has uses that finer salt does not. The account must not treat all salt as identical if the trade itself does not. The tally marks may therefore help distinguish kinds, qualities, or lots in ways a plain number would blur. The smell in a curing place would be stronger than the office, with fish, brine, barrel wood, and sharp salt air mingling heavily. We need only touch it lightly here, because our subject remains the tally clerk, but the sensory trail matters. It reminds us that a mark in Nantes may have consequences in rooms filled with entirely different odors and labors. The buyer may return with a question days later. The clerk opens the ledger. The mark answers. Perhaps the issue concerns a lot delivered short, or a grade misunderstood, or a timing promised to another customer. The old entry becomes active again. You see the page wake under the clerk's hand, not literally, but in usefulness. A well-kept mark saves the buyer from relying only on memory. It saves the worker from having his word float unsupported. It saves the merchant from searching through confusion. That is the quiet moral life of good records. They cannot make people kind, but they can make fairness easier to practice. The weird tally marks that fit may also have protected those with less power in the exchange. A worker credited clearly is harder to erase. A load recorded plainly is harder to deny. We say this softly, because the world was not made fair by ledgers alone, but careful marks could still hold a small line against forgetfulness and convenience. An older worker may not read every word, but he may recognize his own name or the sign associated with his load. He leans in, smelling of salt, wool, and outdoor air, and the clerk points to the line. The worker nods. Recognition does not require full literacy in the formal sense. It requires shared signs and repeated trust. There is tenderness in partial literacy around practical marks. People learn what they need, where they need it. A symbol, a name, shape, a repeated column, a familiar total. The world of writing is not all or nothing. In working offices, reading often happens in pieces, supported by voice, memory, and gesture. The tally mark lives well in that middle ground. A clerk who understands this does not humiliate a person for needing help with text. He points, repeats, confirms, and lets the record serve its purpose. The calm of the room depends on such manners. We stay with that because sleep wants gentleness, and history is full of small courtesies that never became famous. The buyer leaves with his answer, and the clerk returns to the current day. The interruption has been absorbed. The page remains orderly. A note may be added if needed. Then the pen resumes its small path across the paper. Work like this is made of interruptions handled without losing the thread. The thread itself is stronger than it looks. It runs from the pan water to the office ledger, from the ledger to the warehouse, from the warehouse to buyers, and from buyers into kitchens, boats, curing sheds, and markets. The tally mark is one knot in that thread. It is small enough to miss, but the thread weakens if the knot fails. In 1870s Nantes, many people likely passed such marks without thinking them peculiar. They were simply part of how work was done. The peculiarity arrives later, when the system is gone and only the marks remain. We meet them then as strangers, and with patience they become less strange, not because we solve every code, but because we restore the daily world around them. You may imagine an archive far in the future, though we do not leave the old room entirely. A person opens a ledger and sees marks that seem odd, fitted into columns with stubborn confidence. The marks ask for context. They ask for salt pans, clerks, carts, weather, and local measures to be imagined again. Tonight, we give them that company. The original Clerk did not write for romance. He wrote for use. That is why the marks feel alive. They have not been polished into symbols for display. They retain the pressure of the day that made them. The pen moved because someone was waiting, because a load needed entry, because a total had to agree before the door closed. As buyers and workers pass through the page, evening draws closer again, and we turn toward the final labor of arranging tomorrow before it arrives. Preparing for tomorrow begins while today still has light. The clerk places unfinished matters where they can be found easily. He may fold a slip lengthwise and tuck it into the ledger at the relevant page, not too deep, so it protrudes just enough. A note may be weighted with an inkwell or ruler. The desk becomes a small landscape of intention. You can see the difference between disorder and useful incompletion. Disorder hides what matters. Useful incompletion shows what remains. The clerk's table at the end of afternoon may not be empty, but it is readable. Tomorrow's hand, which will be his own hand made new by sleep, can understand what today's hand has left behind. The tally marks that fit help with this handoff to the future. A pending mark, a partial mark, or a mark placed in a certain column can say, "Not yet, check later, carry forward." Such signs prevent tomorrow from beginning blind. The clerk is writing not only for other people, but for himself after rest has softened memory. There is humility in admitting that memory needs help. The clerk does not trust himself to recall every loose matter perfectly. He writes it down. He marks it clearly. He lets the page remember what the mind should not have to hold overnight. You may feel your own thoughts easing at the idea of giving each concern a place. A drawer opens. Inside are string, seals, folded papers, perhaps spare nibs, perhaps a knife. The drawer smells of dry wood and old paper. The clerk removes what he needs and closes it with a soft push. No slam. The furniture has served too long to be treated roughly. Even the drawer participates in the calm economy of the room. If outgoing notes must be prepared, the clerk writes them with a slightly different hand, clearer for travel. A warehouse instruction. A request for confirmation from a pan. A reminder to a merchant. Each note carries a piece of the office outward. The tally mark may appear again, now detached from its ledger but still tied to the same system. The messenger, assistant or worker who takes the note, folds it into his pocket. Paper against cloth, cloth against body. Body into street, street toward warehouse or marsh. We follow it for only a moment, enough to feel how records move through human warmth, not through abstract channels. Every paper has to be carried by someone, even if only across a yard. In the salt pans, preparation for tomorrow may mean setting water levels, covering tools, repairing a bank before night damp, or placing baskets where morning hands can find them. The office and marsh mirror each other again. Both places end by arranging conditions for the next beginning. You can rest inside that repeating shape. The pan worker may look at the sky before leaving. Color near the horizon matters. Wind direction matters. Clouds over the sea matter. He may say very little, but his body is reading. The clerk in the city may listen to rain on the window later and think of how tomorrow's page will be lighter. Different senses, same trade. The weird 1870s Nantes salt pan tally marks that fit are therefore marks of expectation as well as completion. Some close accounts. Some open them. Some hold a promise until proof arrives. They are not dead scratches. They manage time, keeping yesterday, today and tomorrow from collapsing into one another. You may notice how often this work depends on thresholds. Doorways, pan banks, ledger lines, warehouse walls, cart sides, column borders, folded edges of paper. A threshold separates while allowing passage. Salt crosses thresholds all day, and the clerk records each crossing in a form that can be followed later. The threshold between work and rest is one of them. The clerk cannot carry the entire office home in his head. He must leave enough behind on the page. When he does, rest becomes possible. The ledger takes over its share. The closed door takes over its share. Night takes over its share. This division is gentle and necessary. A final review may involve touching no ink at all. The clerk simply looks. His gaze moves from table to drawer to shelf to ledger to slips. The room answers silently. This is ready. That needs carrying. This must be checked tomorrow. That is complete. You can feel the satisfaction of a room that has been made intelligible. If a mark still troubles him, he may reopen the ledger and add a tiny clarifying note while the thought is fresh. Better a minute now than confusion later. The lamp may already be lit, making his shadow fall over the page. He shifts so the light clears the line. The note enters the margin, small and calm. Margins are kind places when used well. They allow the main order to remain, while admitting that life sometimes needs an aside. A late clarification, a changed condition, a remembered name. The tally marks fit the columns, but the margins help the system breathe. Without margins, record keeping becomes brittle. This too feels human. We all need margins, a little space for correction, a little room for what did not fit the first line. The clerk's page teaches this quietly, without becoming a lesson. It simply leaves enough edge around the ruled order for the day's real shape to appear. Outside, the light lowers over Nantes, and the Loire takes on a pewter color. Boats at the quay shift gently against ropes. A rope creaks. Water touches stone with a small repeated sound. Somewhere nearby, salt that was counted earlier rests in a warehouse, and the mark that names it rests in the ledger. The two rests answer each other. As evening folds itself around the city again, we remain with the quiet durability of the marks, how they endured handling, weather, memory, and the ordinary fading of the day. Durability in a mark does not mean hardness, it means being clear enough to last through use. The clerk writes for eyes that may be tired, for rooms that may be dim, for paper that may age, and for questions that may come after everyone has forgotten the exact voice that spoke the number. You feel the care in that future-minded writing. Ink itself is a kind of trust. It darkens a decision and makes it harder to deny. The clerk knows this, so he does not spend ink carelessly. Each mark has been allowed onto the page because it has a reason to be there. The page is not a place for wandering thoughts. It is a place for useful memory. The tally marks that fit survive because they are matched to the conditions of their world. They can be made quickly with a pen that has already written all morning. They can be read near a lamp. They can sit beside names without stealing space. They can be repeated, compared, crossed, corrected, and carried into totals. They are small, adaptable tools. A tool does not have to be made of wood or iron. A mark can be a tool. A habit can be a tool. A column can be a tool. The salt pan tally clerk uses all of these, just as the pan worker uses rake, gate, bank, and basket. We rest in the thought that human beings have always made tools out of both matter and memory. Durability also depends on storage. The book must be kept dry. The shelf must be safe from leaks. The room must be closed against careless handling. A ledger is strong in one sense and fragile in another. It can hold years of trade, yet a spill or damp season can wound it. The clerk's care extends beyond writing into keeping. When he places the book away, he is protecting not paper alone, but all the labor translated into paper. The salt heaps may move on. The carts may be dismantled. The workers may grow old. The mark remains, if kept properly, as a narrow bridge back to those days. You can feel the softness of that preservation, even inside a practical office. The old books are not silent exactly. They have the quiet of things waiting to be asked. Their covers press against one another. Their pages hold faint unevenness from years of ink. If opened, they release the smell of dust, glue, cloth, and a little salt carried in by handling. The past often smells less distant than we expect. In 1870s Nantes, no clerk could know which marks would one day seem strange. Familiar things rarely announce their future mystery. He wrote because the work required writing. Yet his ordinary marks now let us enter a forgotten corner of labor, and that is enough. The modesty of the purpose makes the survival more intimate. A person in the future might puzzle over why a mark sits perfectly in one column, but never another. The answer may lie in a measure, a local term, a warehouse practice, or an agreement long out of use. We do not need to force certainty where the record remains partial. We can listen to the evidence with the same patience the clerk used when checking a doubtful load. Patience with old marks resembles patience with sleep. You do not seize meaning all at once. You let outlines soften and return. You let the mind notice a scent, a sound, a tool, a gesture. The world assembles itself gently. Tonight, the tally marks become understandable not through haste but through companionship. A late clerk might run a hand over the closed cover before leaving, though perhaps only to push it square with the shelf. The gesture is practical, but we may find feeling in it. Not sentimentality, just respect for an object that has carried the day well. Work teaches affection for reliable things. The same affection belongs to the salt worker's rake, the cartman's harness, the warehouse keeper's scale, and the clerk's ruler. Each object is known by flaws as much as by function. A slight bend, a worn place, a sound it makes when used correctly. You know a tool deeply when you can tell by touch whether it is ready. The tally mark has no handle, but it too has a feel. The clerk knows when it is made correctly. The stroke lands, the cross sits, the hook turns. The sign occupies its proper space. A badly made mark feels wrong in the hand and looks wrong to the eye. Correction begins in that bodily recognition. This is one reason the marks fit beyond explanation. They fit because the hand has practiced them until rightness becomes tactile. The concept and the motion have fused. We can watch from outside, but the deepest knowledge lives in the doing. That is true of many quiet jobs, and it is part of their dignity. Night brings a soft end to the visible work, but not to the processes beneath it. Salt in storage absorbs and releases tiny amounts of moisture. Paper relaxes in changing air. Clay banks cool. River water rises or falls. Horses sleep standing or shift in straw. The world continues its low maintenance while people rest. You may find comfort in that continuation. Not everything depends on wakeful thought. Some things can be set in order and left. The ledger on the shelf does not need us to stare at it. The marks do not fade because the clerk has gone home. The salt does not forget its store. The pans do not forget the morning. As darkness settles fully, the city and marsh become connected by memory rather than movement, and we drift back into the earliest hours before dawn, where the next cycle waits in the cool air. Before dawn, Nantes is quieter, though never entirely still. A cart may pass early, iron rims sounding hollow on stone. Somewhere, a door opens for a baker, a dock worker, a stable hand. The river is a dark presence, more heard than seen. Its smell comes through alleys and warehouse yards, carrying damp, mud, wood, and a faint trace of distant tide. The salt office remains closed. Inside, the ledger rests. The tally marks that fit are invisible in the dark, but they are not lost. Their order is held between covers. Their meanings wait for light and hands. You can imagine the cool surface of the table, the pen lying where it was placed, the sand shaker settled after yesterday's use. Out beyond the city, the salt pans are pale under early sky. The banks hold beads of moisture. Reeds along a ditch tremble with the smallest air. A worker may arrive while the world still feels half-made, carrying a tool over one shoulder. His steps are measured. He knows the path by repetition, even before the light makes it clear. There is a particular quiet before work begins, when everything necessary is present but not yet moving. The pan, the rake, the gate, the basket, the path. In the office, the ledger, the pen, the ink, the slips, the chair. These paired arrangements wait in different places, and we move between them slowly, feeling how the day is already shaped. The worker looks over the pans. He may crouch near the water, touch the surface, lift a little brine, or simply watch how it holds the first light. The air is cool against the face. It tastes faintly salted. A bird calls once from the marsh edge. The sound travels farther than expected in the open morning. If the weather has been fair, there may be promise in the pans. If dampness returned too heavily overnight, the work may be delayed. The worker accepts the condition before acting. This acceptance is not passivity. It is accurate beginning. You cannot guide water well if you refuse to see what water has done. Later the clerk will accept the page in a similar way. He will open to the next line, see what yesterday left, and begin from there. A good worker begins with the given world. The tally marks fit because they do not pretend salt appears by command. They record what the marsh and people actually manage together. The first tool lifted in the morning makes a small sound that feels larger in the quiet. Wood against wood. A scrape at the shed door. A basket shifted from its place. These sounds are not dramatic, but they mark the crossing from readiness into labor. You hear them as gently as a person turning in sleep. In the city, shutters open one by one. The clerk's office takes in a gray wash of light. Dust becomes visible above the table. The ledger cover shows worn corners. The chair waits slightly angled, perhaps from yesterday's leaving. When the clerk arrives, he does not enter a new world. He enters a world prepared by his own earlier care. He may bring the chill in with him on his coat. The room accepts him. He sets things down. He opens the ledger. The first page sound of the morning is dry and intimate. You can hear paper rubbing paper, a small sound that belongs to offices, archives, and old letters. The day has begun without needing to announce itself. The weird tally marks that fit will appear again, but not immediately in a rush. First, there is preparation. The ink is checked. A pen is tested. Yesterday's pending notes are reviewed. The clerk reads what he wrote before leaving, and his past self becomes useful to his present self. That is one of the sweetest economies of careful work. A note left clearly can spare the morning mind from strain. The clerk sees that one load needs confirmation, another total must be carried. A warehouse lot should be checked before noon. He receives these instructions from yesterday with quiet gratitude, though he may not think of it that way. Good order often feels like nothing going wrong. When the first report comes, the clerk is ready. The voice at the door carries outdoor air. The name is given. The measure follows. The mark is made, and once again, the living world narrows into a sign without losing itself completely. We have seen enough now to feel the marsh inside the ink. The repetition is not empty. Each cycle differs slightly. A different weather, a different load, a different hand bringing the slip, a different degree of tiredness in the voice. The marks repeat because the work repeats, but the world beneath them is always particular. That is why routine can be calming without being blank. You begin to know the room's morning pace. The first entries are spaced with care. Later, they may cluster. The clerk's shoulders settle as the hand warms. The page becomes less bare. Salt dust comes in on boots. The smell of ink strengthens. The office grows into its day, just as the pans grow into light. The salt pan tally clerk of 1870s Nantes lives inside this daily unfolding. He is not separate from the marsh, even if stone streets stand between them. His marks are fed by the same sun that dries the pans and the same rain that delays them. His work is indoor weather made legible. A worker brings news that one pan has given less than expected because an edge failed. The clerk listens, asks which pan, and writes the note. The mark for the smaller load sits modestly in the column, with its explanation nearby. Nothing needs to be forced into the shape of a good day. A poor yield can be recorded honestly and left in peace. Another report may be better. A pan repaired last week is producing cleanly again. The worker's voice may carry satisfaction, though still in the plain tone of business. The clerk records the load. The mark fits. The page receives both shortage and abundance with the same calm surface. This impartial calm is one reason people return to the ledger for answers. We can feel how soothing it is to have a place where things are simply set down. Not exaggerated, not hidden. Set down, the salt gathered, the salt delayed, the salt stored, the salt moved. A mark for each thing in its place. For a sleepy listener, this order is not cold. It is shelter from the mind's habit of carrying too much. The morning continues with small variations. A pen blot is caught before it spreads. A worker corrects himself and gives the proper pan name. The clerk smiles faintly, perhaps, or only nods. A cart arrives later than planned, wheels splashed from a wet patch in the road. The mark waits until the load is confirmed. The road itself leaves traces in the account. Mud slows transport. Dust dries sacks. A broken wheel changes timing. In the ledger, these may appear as notes, gaps or shifted entries. The tally marks that fit are surrounded by the world's small resistances. They fit not because the world is smooth, but because the system has learned how to handle roughness gently. At mid-morning, a shaft of light reaches the table. It shows the texture of the clerk's sleeve and the faint salt haze on a worker's cuff. It also reveals old scratches in the tabletop, perhaps from years of pens, knives, paper edges, and hurried objects set down too hard. The table has been keeping its own record, wordless but visible. You might trace one scratch with your eyes and wonder which day made it. A dropped tool, a trimmed pen, a bundle of slips tied with rough string. Not every record can be read, and that is all right. Some traces remain as texture only. The ledger gives names and measures. The table gives wear. The clerk's work lives between readable and unreadable traces. He turns fleeting action into readable form, but he is surrounded by marks that no one interprets formally. Stains, dents, smoothed chair arms, polished drawer pulls. The tally marks belong to this larger family of evidence, except that they were made deliberately to speak. In Nantes, as in many working cities, much knowledge passes without printed instruction. A new assistant learns where to stand, how loudly to speak, when to interrupt, which drawer sticks, which merchant dislikes delay, which worker knows the pans best. The ledger teaches one part of the job, the room teaches the rest. The assistant may be asked to read back a line. His voice is careful. The clerk listens for accuracy. If the young voice stumbles over a mark, the clerk corrects gently. The correction is repeated. A small competence forms. You can hear it the moment a sign stops being strange to the learner and becomes usable. That moment is important, though quiet. Every local system survives by being taught. If no one learns the marks, they become dead shapes. If they are taught well, they continue to hold salt, labor, and trust inside their small forms. The 1870s Nantes tally marks fit partly because generations of users made them fit through teaching. As noon approaches again, the office is no longer cool. The air has thickened with breath, paper, and the day's traffic. The clerk may open the window wider if dust and noise allow. A wash of city sound enters. Wheels, a vendor's call, river work. A distant hammer, the brief clatter of something dropped and recovered. The room breathes with Nantes. The salt pans breathe differently. Heat lifts from shallow water. Light presses against the eyes. Workers narrow their gaze under hat brims. The rake moves. Crystals gather. The cycle continues. A load that is only beginning. There may become an afternoon mark here, and the clerk's open page waits without impatience. By midday, the work has widened again from marks to bodies, from ledger lines to shoulders and hands, and we move with the carriers who bring the salt from shining pans toward the city's patient books. Carrying salt is a full-body conversation with weight. A basket has to be lifted cleanly, balanced, and emptied without wasting the load or hurting the back. The carrier's hands know the rim. The shoulder knows the strap or pole. The feet know the narrow bank. You feel the care in each step, because a spilled basket is work undone. The salt itself is not uniform under the hand. Some of it is coarse and damp, clumping together. Some falls more freely, grain against grain. In sunlight it can dazzle. In shadow it looks grey, almost humble. The carrier does not admire it for long. He knows its value through effort, through how it pulls on the arms and dries the skin. A tally mark later may stand for several such lifts. This is easy to forget if we see only the page. We restore the weight now. Each mark has baskets inside it. It has the bend of knees, the tightening of fingers, the brief rest after emptying, the breath taken before returning for more. The clerk writes small because the work has already been large. A cart waits at the edge where the ground can bear it. The horse shifts, its hoof pressing into damp earth. Flies gather and are brushed away by tail and ear. Harness leather creaks. The cart-boards smell of old salt, sun, and wet wood. The driver watches the loading with a practical eye, judging balance as much as amount. The tally system begins even here, perhaps with spoken counts, moved tokens, or simple memory held by workers until the load is ready. Not every count is written immediately. Some pass through bodies first. A man may call every 10th basket, though we use no figures here, only the sense of grouped repetition. The rhythm helps memory stay awake. The weird tally marks that fit in Nantes may reflect such grouping. A mark can compress a cluster of repeated acts into one sign. It can say, this many baskets, this kind of load, this confirmed measure, without restating every lift. The sign is short because the workers have already performed the long version in flesh and breath. When the cart is full, the load is smoothed or settled enough for travel. Loose salt is pushed inward. A covering may be used if damp threatens. The driver checks the sides. A worker wipes his forehead with a sleeve, leaving a pale streak near the cuff. Someone says the pan name again, so it will travel correctly with the load. Names matter. A pan name may carry geography, family memory, a feature of the land, or old local speech. The clerk needs the name because salt without origin can become confusion. You hear the name spoken near the cart, then later in the office, and the word becomes a bridge from open marsh to ruled page. The road to Nantes changes under the wheels. First the soft margins of salt country, then firmer track, then stone or packed road nearer the city. Each surface has a sound. Mud sucks. Dry ruts knock. Stone rings. The cart's motion writes the journey into the driver's body, and by the time he reaches the office, his voice carries that road even if he says only a few words. A carrier or driver may bring a slip already marked. It might be folded into a hatband, tucked into a coat, or held carefully away from wet hands. Paper is vulnerable in such work. A smudged slip creates questions. A dry slip saves them. The person carrying it becomes, for a while, the guardian of a small piece of order. In the office, the clerk receives not only the slip, but the condition of its journey. Is it damp? Is it torn? Is the mark clear? Does the spoken report agree? He handles the paper with respect because it has traveled through a rougher world. You can almost feel the change as the slip leaves a salt-stiff hand and rests on the smoother table. The tally mark is checked. It fits the expected form, or nearly so. The clerk may redraw it in the ledger with the steadier hand of the office, translating field roughness into archival calm. That translation is not betrayal. It is preservation. The load's first sign has done its traveling work. The ledger sign will do the longer remembering. If the slip is unclear, the clerk asks. The driver explains. Perhaps wind caught the paper. Perhaps rain threatened. Perhaps the mark was made against the cart rail while someone else was calling account. The clerk listens, compares, and enters the record only when the meaning is steady enough. We stay with that steadiness until the mark appears. There is something deeply soothing in watching uncertainty become clear without haste. The clerk does not force the answer. He gathers it. A word from the driver, a look at the slip, a comparison with expected yield, a check against another note. Then the pen moves. The mark fits, and the page is calmer for it. The carriers leave, and their absence changes the room. Less outdoor smell, less boot noise. The clerk continues with the trace they brought. This is how physical work becomes administrative work, without ceasing to be physical in memory. The salt has moved on, but its weight remains hidden in the shape of the entry. As afternoon gathers around the newly arrived loads, we turn toward the small disputes and corrections that any honest tally system must make room for. A dispute in this room need not be loud. It may begin as a hesitation. A worker hears the clerk repeat a measure and says, softly, that it should be different. The clerk looks up. No one moves quickly. The air tightens just a little, then loosens as the details are brought forward. You can feel how a calm process keeps a small question from becoming a large one. The clerk asks which pan, which load, which hour, which person counted. Each question is plain. Each answer narrows the uncertainty. A slip is checked, a previous mark is examined. Perhaps another worker is called in. The page remains open, waiting. The ink does not move until the facts settle enough to hold. In 1870s Nantes, where salt passed through many hands, corrections were not signs of failure. They were part of the work. Any system that handles weather, baskets, carts, damp goods, and human fatigue must include a way to adjust. The tally marks that fit are useful partly because they can be crossed, amended, clarified, or paired with notes. A correction mark has its own tone. It should be visible, but not chaotic. The first entry should not vanish as if it never happened, because later readers may need to understand the change. The clerk draws a line, adds a note, places the corrected mark, and lets the page tell the truth of revision. You can rest in that honesty. There is dignity in records that admit correction. They do not pretend the working day was smoother than it was. They show that someone listened again, someone checked, someone made room for better information. The soft scratch of the correcting pen carries a small moral weight, though the room remains ordinary. The worker watches. If the correction favors him, he may feel relief. If it does not, he may at least see how the decision was reached. A clear page does not remove every disappointment, but it can reduce suspicion. The clerk's calm hand helps keep the human weather in the room from turning stormy. A merchant may dispute a damp weight, arguing that water has made the load seem larger than its useful salt. The warehouse keeper may answer that the condition was noted. The clerk may point to the mark showing quality or state. Here the tally sign does more than count. It carries judgment made at arrival, a little witness preserved in ink. The smell of damp salt becomes important in such a question. You can imagine a sack opened, crystals clumped, fingers pressing and releasing. Is this normal dampness or something more? The answer may affect price, storage, or credit. The clerk's record needs enough nuance to serve this practical distinction. A plain total alone would not do. The weird tally marks that fit are therefore part of a larger vocabulary of fairness. They do not make fairness automatic, but they give people handles to hold while discussing it. A mark for checked, a mark for pending, a mark for damp, a mark for transferred. Each handle lets the conversation stay attached to the work rather than drifting into accusation. Sometimes the correction is simple, a name entered under the wrong line, a pan confused with its neighbor, a load split but recorded whole. The clerk makes the change. The assistant watches. The worker waits. The city continues outside. A cart goes by, and its sound fills the pause until the matter is settled. Other times, the answer must wait until someone returns from the warehouse or pan. Waiting is entered too, if the clerk is careful. A pending matter left unmarked can become invisible. A pending matter marked properly remains present without being falsely complete. You can feel how useful this is in work and beyond work. The page with corrections may look less clean, but more truthful. A spotless ledger can be a beautiful thing, yet a used ledger with visible changes may be more human. It shows contact with life. The tally marks fit not by avoiding mess, but by giving mess a manageable form. This is one of the deep comforts of the system. At the end of such a dispute, there may be no grand reconciliation. Someone nods, someone takes a receipt, someone leaves. The clerk sands the ink and turns back to the next matter. The room exhales. You may not even notice the moment peace returns, because it returns by degrees, like water settling after a hand has passed through it. The corrected mark remains. It will speak later if asked. It may prevent the same dispute from returning. It may teach the assistant what to watch for next time. It may reveal, years later, a tiny crease in the daily process. We stay with it gently, because these small repairs are part of the life of the ledger. As the corrected entries dry, the room quiets again, and we follow the marks into the deeper rhythm of season, where one day of salt work becomes part of a wider year. A salt season has a different feeling from a single shift. It begins with preparation, rises through workable weather, bends around rain and heat, and tapers as conditions change. The tally clerk experiences the season as pages filling at different rates. The pan worker experiences it through light, wind, cracked hands, and the changing smell of the marsh. In spring, there may be cleaning, repairing, arranging, and waiting. The pans must be made ready before they can give. Channels are cleared, banks are shaped, tools are checked. The ledger may carry fewer salt entries, and more notes of preparation or old balances. You feel the season stretching its limbs before steady work begins. Summer brings glare, heat, and busier pages when weather allows. Salt forms more readily, carts move more often, and the clerk's marks gather thickly. The room may feel close by afternoon. Ink dries faster in some conditions, slower in humid storms. The clerk adapts, as everyone in the trade adapts. No one works outside weather. Autumn changes the tone, the light lowers, damp returns, final loads, storage concerns, and unsettled accounts become more visible. People think about what has been gathered and what must last. The marks in the ledger may begin to feel like a harvest laid into columns. You can see the year becoming countable, though never entirely controllable. In 1870s Nantes, the salt pan tally clerk may know the season's character before totals are made, simply from the density of marks. A good stretch leaves pages crowded. A broken season leaves space. The eye reads this before arithmetic confirms it. The ledger becomes a weather memory, written in the language of trade. The weird tally marks that fit also fit the year because they repeat across seasonal change. The same sign made in June and began in September carries the same structural meaning, though the body making it may feel different. In heat, the hand may sweat. In chill, fingers may stiffen. The mark remains recognizable, a steady form through bodily variation. Seasonal work teaches patience on a larger scale. A day can be lost and recovered. A week can disappoint. A month can surprise. The clerk's job is not to make the season better or worse on paper. It is to let the season be known accurately. This honesty gives the year a shape people can plan around. A worker coming in after a poor stretch may carry frustration quietly. His clothes smell of damp wool rather than sun-warmed salt. The load is small. The clerk records it without comment beyond what is needed. There is kindness in not making a poor day heavier with unnecessary words. The mark is small because the yield is small, and that is enough. After a good stretch, the room may hold a different energy. Still low, but fuller. More slips, more totals, more storage questions. The clerk's work grows, and he may stay later, yet the tone remains steady because the process is known. Abundance can be tiring, but it is less frightening when the marks fit and the system can receive it. The year's end may require broader totals. The clerk gathers days into weeks, weeks into months, months into accounts. Each larger number rests on many small marks. We do not rush past this. A total that seems simple at the top of a page is made of countless careful moments beneath it. The quiet grandeur of accounting is hidden in that accumulation. He may draw ruled lines with extra care. When closing a period, the ruler edge presses into the paper. The pen follows, leaving a dark boundary. Above it lies a section of the season. Below it lies whatever comes next. The line is humble, but it gives the eye permission to rest. You feel the page becoming orderly enough for winter memory. In winter, the pans may be quieter, depending on local practice and weather, but the records remain useful. Accounts are settled, repairs are planned, debts or credits are reviewed. The salt already gathered continues to move. The clerk's marks from warmer days are read in colder rooms. The season sleeps in ink while the marsh lies under damp air. A winter office has different sounds, heavier footsteps, thicker clothing, the occasional cough, rain against the window, paper that feels colder under the hand. The clerk may work closer to the lamp. Old marks made in summer glare are now read by flame. This passage from sun to lamp is one of the quiet beauties of record keeping. The tally marks that fit must serve across that passage. A mark made quickly in a busy August afternoon must remain clear in a wet winter morning when a merchant asks about stored salt. That durability is not accidental. It comes from repeated forms, good spacing, and the clerk's refusal to let haste ruin the future. You can imagine him finding such a summer mark months later. The page opens, the old entry appears. For a moment, the warm season returns in the mind. Carts, dust, sharp light, voices at the door. Then the winter question is answered. The past has done its work. The book closes again. As the season turns inside the ledger, the human lives around the marks turn too, and we move gently toward the families, apprentices, and older hands who gave the salt trade its continuity. A quiet job is rarely solitary in the deepest sense. Even when one person sits alone at a table, others have shaped the work before him. Someone taught the marks. Someone ruled the first pages. Someone decided where slips should be kept. Someone argued years ago over a measure until the current practice became settled. The clerk inherits a room full of invisible decisions. In Nantes, an older clerk may have trained a younger one by letting him copy less risky entries first. Not the disputed loads, not the final balances, simple confirmations, clear names, familiar marks. The younger hand learns confidence by being placed near order. You can see him leaning close, tongue perhaps pressed lightly behind the teeth, concentrating on a stroke that the older man makes without thought. The first successful entry might not be praised much, but it changes the apprentice's feeling. The mark sits correctly. The ink dries. The older clerk does not correct it. That absence of correction becomes its own quiet approval. We understand how much a person can receive from a simple nod in a working room. Families connected to the pans may pass knowledge differently. A child learns where not to step before learning why. A young person carries small tools, then baskets, then learns water and salt. Place names enter the ear early. Weather signs become household talk. By the time such a person brings a load to Nantes, he carries generations of practical memory in ordinary speech. The tally clerk's marks meet that oral memory at the desk. A pan name spoken with local pronunciation becomes a written form. A measure known by handling becomes a sign in a column. The meeting is imperfect, but it works because both sides return to it again and again. Repetition smooths the rough edge between spoken life and written order. The weird tally marks that fit may therefore contain traces of accent, custom, family trade, and local agreement, even if the ink does not show them directly. A sign can be shaped by the way people talk about work. It can compress a phrase used so often that no one needs to write it fully. Old shorthand is often a fossil of repeated speech. You can imagine women in the salt economy too. Though records may name them unevenly, women might help with work around the pans, manage household accounts, carry knowledge of measures, prepare food for workers, or appear in records as widows, sellers, or account holders. The clerk's page may not fully show their labor, but the working world would have felt it everywhere. A woman arriving with a question about an account might stand firmly at the desk, knowing exactly which load or credit concerns her household. The clerk turns the book. The mark is found. Her presence reminds us that working records often hold family survival in plain lines. Salt is trade, but trade is also bread, rent, tools, and winter security. The room must make space for such practical dignity. A good clerk does not treat the question as an interruption of real work. The question is real work. The mark exists so that people can know where they stand. You feel the humane center of the job in these moments, where ink becomes answer. Older workers may carry stories of years when the pans gave poorly or surprisingly well. They may remember repairs, disputes, changes in buyers, or a season when a particular measure caused confusion. Their memories help interpret current work. The clerk may not write the stories, but he listens to the parts that affect the account. The ledger is formal, yet it is fed by talk. An apprentice listening nearby learns more than signs. He learns tone, how to ask without offending, how to doubt without accusing, how to correct without shaming, how to pause when a tired worker searches memory. These manners are not decoration. They are part of the machinery of trust. The tally marks that fit cannot do their work without that trust. A sign system imposed without shared practice becomes brittle. A sign system used inside patient relationships becomes strong. The marks fit because people around them know how to behave when something does not fit at first. They know how to bring the world back into alignment. The office may hold a few personal objects that speak softly of the clerk's life beyond work. A worn scarf on a peg, a tin for food, a repaired chair cushion, perhaps a small calendar or saint's card, depending on the person and place. We do not dwell too much, but these touches keep the room human. A ledger is kept by someone with a body, habits, and home. The pan workers have their own small comforts. A favored tool, a place to sit out of the wind, a shared joke about a stubborn gate, a way of wrapping bread so it stays clean. The work is hard enough that comfort becomes practical. Anything that helps a person return steadily to the task belongs to the rhythm of the day. You may notice how people in such work conserve energy. They do not speak more than needed in heat. They do not lift twice when once will do. They place tools where the next hand can find them. The clerk does the same with marks. Economy of motion, economy of speech, economy of ink. Quiet work often teaches this kind of grace. As the people around the marks come into view, the ledger feels warmer, and we drift back to the page itself, where names, signs, and small spaces hold an entire community of labor. A name in the ledger is more than letters. It is a person entering the official memory of the day. Some names repeat often enough that the clerk's hand knows them. Others appear briefly. A new name may require careful spelling, spoken slowly, corrected once, then settled. You can hear the clerk repeat it under his breath before placing it beside the mark. The name and mark together form a pair. Without the name, the mark floats. Without the mark, the name lacks the day's measured action. Together, they say that this person, household, merchant or lot, has touched the salt trade at this point. The pairing is simple, but it steadies the account. In 1870s, Nantes, handwriting itself carries personality. The clerk may aim for uniformity, yet his hand reveals pressure, speed, tiredness, and training. A long day may make later letters lean. A cold morning may tighten loops. The tally marks remain more consistent than ordinary words because their job demands it. But even they carry the faint pulse of the hand. You can imagine comparing two pages from different years. The same mark appears, but one is angular, another rounder, another compressed. Like voices saying the same word, each hand keeps the meaning while changing the music. This is one reason old ledgers feel alive when read slowly. They hold both system and person. The spaces between entries matter as well. Crowding suggests busyness, thrift or shortage of paper. Wider spacing may show a slower day or a more generous form. Margins carry caution. Blank lines sometimes mark transition. The page breathes through its empty places, and the tally marks fit because they respect that breathing. A blot near a mark might come from haste, a bump, a poor nib, or a sudden interruption. We do not know. The blot remains. The clerk may have sanded it, cursed softly under his breath, or simply worked around it. Such imperfections do not ruin the page. They remind us that order is made by human hands under imperfect conditions. The weird tally marks that fit are most beautiful when seen amid these imperfections. Perfect signs in a perfect system can feel lifeless. Working signs on used paper feel inhabited. They have survived the same conditions as the people who made them: damp, fatigue, interruption, correction, and the steady need to continue. A page near the end of a busy period may have darker edges from frequent turning. The corner softens where fingers lift it. A tiny tear may be repaired or simply avoided. The clerk learns the weak places in the book. He turns with care. The ledger is not an abstract authority. It is an aging object that must be handled kindly to remain useful. The same kindness appears in the treatment of older workers or tired carriers when the office is at its best. Speak clearly. Wait. Confirm. Do not make a person repeat more than needed. Do not let impatience create error. The job's practical demands and its human decencies meet in the same behaviors. You sit near the table as another line is entered. The name comes first, or perhaps the date, depending on the local form. Then the mark. Then the measure. Then a note. The sequence repeats. After many entries, the page looks almost woven. Dark signs cross pale ruled lines, making a textile of trade. Textiles, ledgers, baskets, and salt pans all share pattern. Over and under, line and space, unit and repetition. Human beings often make order by repeating simple forms until they hold something larger. The tally clerk does it with ink. The basket maker does it with fiber. The pan worker does it with banks and channels. The thought is gentle enough to carry us onward. A single mark is small. A page of marks is a day. A book of pages is a season. A shelf of books is a working memory of a place. Nantes, salt, marsh, river, office, hand. Each joins the others through these little signs that once seemed strange and now feel almost companionable. As the page fills and the day's names settle into their lines, the work moves once more toward evening, where the slow closing of accounts becomes a kind of lullaby in paper, sand, and fading light.